Mm-hmm. Okay, we're now live.
Thank you, Linda. Well, welcome everyone. First of all, just a bit of housekeeping. Please remember that this is a public meeting and we are live streaming. In terms of etiquette, if you could please have your microphones on mute, and then when you're invited to speak, obviously you'll be unmuted and unmute yourself at that point in time. This does help to keep the background noise down for the meeting. Also, when you wish to speak, if you could raise your hand, also indicate if you wish in the chat box as well. I'm operating today from the iPad, unfortunately, because I've got an internet issue at the moment and I can't use my own personal laptop. So I'm very restricted here in terms of chairing this meeting. I've only got a few screens up at the moment. So the officers, I'm going to have to rely upon the officers a great deal at this meeting. When you do indicate, they'll make a list and then keep on feeding that list to me so I can chair the meeting. And you can all have your say and ask questions as we proceed. Moving on to item 1, declaration of interest and roll call. We'll take the two together. So we can do the roll call, please, alphabetically. And at the same time, you can also declare whether you have any interest, please. James, would you like to proceed?
Yes, I will. Councillor Adams.
Here, no declarations of interest.
Councillor Brennan.
Yeah, present, no declarations.
Councillor Bullman.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor Catchpole.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor Holland.
Yeah, no declarations of interest.
Councillor Karimi Guvandu.
Present, no declarations of interest.
Councillor Kelly.
Present, no declarations of interest.
Councillor Nurden.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor Prutton.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor Riley.
Present, no declarations. Thank you, James.
And we also have some portfolio holders present. So, bear with me a moment. Councillor Leggett. Do you have any declarations of interest?
Yes, I think so. As an owner of a rental property under the housing standards item.
Councillor Mancini Boyle.
Present and no declarations.
Okay. And Councillor Hempsel.
I'm here, I have no declarations of interest.
Thank you.
Thank you, James. Are there any other members present observing or looking on? Or is that it?
No, I don't think so.
Thank you, James. Okay, moving on to item 2. Apologies for absence and if we have any substitute. James, do you have any apologies?
Yes, I do. We have apologies from Councillor Hartley. She doesn't have a substitute.
Thank you, James. Moving on to the minutes, the Overview and Scrutiny Committee held on 22nd of September. If you turn to your agenda, they're on page 5. First of all, I'll go through them in terms of them being a correct and true record. So if you have any matters arising, please wait, then we'll move on to matters arising after that. So moving on to page 5. Again, please indicate if you wish to correct any of the minutes or clarification. Page 6. Page 7. Page 8. Page 9. Page 10. Page 11. page 12 and page 13, 14, 15 and 16. So we all agree they're true and correct record?
Yes, everyone seems to be in agreement, Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. Right, Chairman's announcements, item 5. Lord Hempsel has asked if we can bring the item on the enforcement, which is on the agenda, forward, because I understand that she has a personal appointment later on. I did say with the admin team yesterday that I was of a mind to agree to that. However, we just wanted to make sure that the other officers that was also presenting before that didn't have any appointments later on, because we've already got the agenda set. So just clarifying with the officers here, James, Linda, that we're okay to proceed on that basis with the officers, are we?
I think so. I sent an email yesterday and I haven't had any response from many other officers regarding this.
Okay, thank you. So just notifying you, Lana, that we will bring that forward when we get to cabinet reports. And you can thank me at that point in time. Moving on to item 6, public speaking, James.
There's no public speaking, Chairman.
Thank you. And item 7, cabinet reports. If you please turn to page 20 on your agenda. And the first item, item 12 on that agenda, page 40. So if you're all still with this agenda, turn to page 40. You'll see that the first item is budget update report, and Rodney will present this. Rodney Fincham, Assistant Director for Finance. Are you present, Rodney?
Not on the point of information, Chair, we had agreed to bring forward the planning enforcement as the agenda item. Have I understood?
You have just, actually, I've just said that actually, and you're absolutely correct. I do apologise about that actually. Slight slip there from the chair, unfortunately. So could we bring that item forward? I'm just going to go back to the officer for that.
That's page 344, Chairman.
Thank you. And could the Stuart Pontin, right? Hi, Stuart, and do apologise about it. Slight slip from me this morning there. Yes, if you can fire away, please, Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. The report was considered by the place shaping panel last night, who agreed to recommend to Cabinet to agree the use of the enforcement plan and the enforcement strategy as set out in the report. They did seek clarification as to whether or not the reports would need to be referred to Council. We have sought clarification this morning from Democratic Services, who are of the view that the enforcement plan and the strategy are more operational documents and therefore consider it does not need to be referred to Council. Place shaping panel last night also requested that in terms of Appendix 2, which is on page 355, that in relation to the range of enforcement matters that are available to the Council in terms of enforcement notices, breach condition notices and such likes, that we add in headings to identify or to clarify which are pre-formal action, which relate to formal action, and which are compliance options, and also suggested the provision of a flow chart to outline the enforcement process to aid customers in understanding the options and the routes that enforcement can take. It was also requested that in addition to member training, which is outlined in the report, that this should also be provided to parish councils, and it was agreed that we can look to do that. Just in terms of the report itself, the members will note that this follows a review of the Enforcement Service which was recommended by the following an audit of the planning service last year, and also as proposed in the development plan. Broadland District Council currently has an enforcement strategy, and as part of the review, it's proposed to update this to form an enforcement plan as recommended in the National Planning Policy Framework. The strategy that's proposed is more of a customer-focused document. It's proposed to set out in more details of the service and the service standards that customers can expect. And it's also intended that this will form the basis of the web content relating to the enforcement service. The proposals in the plan and the strategy build on the current strategy that Broadland District Council has, and it's proposed to maintain the monthly updates which go to members in terms of the range of cases that are on hand and progress on those, and that will also go to the parish councils. And it's also proposed to continue with the proactive work in terms of condition and commencement monitoring. Nothing further to add to the report, Chair.
Thank you. Right, I'll open that up for questions. Are there any?
Councillor Bullman.
Steve, you got Peter Bullman wants to speak.
Yes, Peter, are you unmuted?
Okay, sorry, I was waiting for your direction, Chairman.
Yeah, I can't see. I've only got a few screens up on this. Thank you, Peter.
Okay. A simple question, really. I assume that this report is in response to some sort of deficiency. What was the level of deficiency, and how will this proposal address it?
Chair, I don't consider there was a deficiency. It's a recommendation with all plans that they are reviewed after a period of time. The Audit Commission noted that the plan was last considered in 2015, and as part of the ongoing review of all policies and plans, it was recommended that this should be revisited. During the review process, we looked at the service that the council offers and also compared it to neighbouring authorities, together with the plans and strategies that are used widely. It was considered that it would be beneficial to include some time parameters around some of the actions to give customers an expectation as to when different stages of the process would be aimed for. And those have been included in the strategy and the plan.
Anyone else?
Chairman, I
Ken,
believe
I've got you on the screen now, Ken. You're one of the few I can see. Please fire away, Ken. You need to unmute, Ken.
Mute it then. Yeah, this one for Stuart. I have to say, as a new councillor, I'm quite disappointed really with what I see the actions of the enforcement officers and what they actually do in my community. We've had many instances of planning regulations being breached, specifically demolition of TPOs and things like that. We seem to have a pussyfoot approach to dealing with all these enforcement actions. As a councillor, I represent quite several thousand residents who really are not over enamoured with the service that Broadland provides. Many of the instances I get are always to do with planning. And what I want to know is, are we going to be more proactive and a bit harder than we are instead of pussyfooting about, which is what I get comments from my residents.
Thank you, Ken.
Chair. I think as outlined in the plan and the strategy, the general approach is to seek to negotiate a solution that is either to resolve or to remove a breach, or to look at what measures could be taken to rectify the breach. In terms of formal action, then the council will take formal action where that's appropriate, but we will seek to find other solutions before heading down the formal route.
Okie dokie. Is there anyone else?
Chairman, I believe Councillor Catchpole was indicating.
Sue, far away.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say that I observed the play shaping panel last night, and I think Stuart's done a really good job of summarising the actions that were suggested there. I think the dilemma is that we've got a public perception of something compared to the actual teeth that we have, which may not be the same. So it would be really great if we could use the training of the town and parish councils and the website to inform residents of just what the council is able to do, and perhaps even what it's not able to do, just to try to help at the understanding of our residents on this topic. Thank you.
Okay, is there anyone else?
Councillor Karimi Guvanlu, and I believe Councillor Hempsall wants to comment as well.
Thank you. Caroline, far away, please.
Just at one point, I was listening to the meeting last night at the Wellbeing panel, and there was a mention of planning moving to South Norfolk. Is that, can we just clarify, is that the whole of the planning department and enforcement?
Would you like me to clarify that, Chair?
Yes, please.
As part of coming back to the office, the Place Directorate will be, its main location will be at Long Stratton, with a presence at Thorpe Lodge, to make sure we are available for appointments, members of the public, and working out the office as appropriate. But the whole Place Directorate, including planning, will have its main location at Long Stratton moving forward.
So to make this clear, if we go back to normal and we're allowed in the offices, when I used to come in for meetings, I used to pop up to planning and discuss things. So that's not going to be available to us anymore?
As part of our interaction with customers and members, we were looking at the moment to see how best to operate that, which will include making appointments. If we know you're in the building and you want to catch up with us, we will be available for you.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Councillor, yeah, I'm going to clarify something on that as well. I need some clarification on that as well, plus something else on the report. But Councillor Hempsall, I understand you wanted to make a contribution now.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. And thank you actually for taking this item early. I remember being a long-standing member of Overview and Scrutiny, and it being a constant frustration when portfolio holders weren't supporting the agenda item that was there. So thank you for taking this early.
It confuses the chairman himself.
It was, yeah. So I do make a point of coming, and but it just so happened that it coincided with something else, somewhere else I need to be. But thank you for that. Just a couple of points. As Sue had mentioned, I think member training, and it kind of echoes what the concerns that Councillor Kelly had. I think member training on planning and enforcement and how we deal with it and how we intend to deal with it moving forward is really quite important. So for that reason, the member training will be organised, and also in some shape or form, parish and town councils will have their own training session as well, because I feel that they are the sort of first port of call when things do go wrong in planning terms, when it comes to members of the public. So it's good for parish and town councils to understand what we can and can't do. So yeah, that's definitely in the pipeline. I think that'll be a really positive step. Other than that, there was a really good discussion yesterday, and I'm pleased that officers will be including the flow chart, which will make things clear and concise, so that we know where we are with any enforcement issues in terms of what we can and can't do. And just finally, to round up the move of the planning team, mostly in the Place Directorate in general. That was an operational matter, which, you know, is often referred to above my pay grade for decision making. So I think we're just going to have to maximise and make sure that any new arrangements do work in terms of our customers and in terms of members. So any feedback that you want to give in terms, you know, when because at the moment we're doing everything virtually on Zoom anyway, but once we start more of the physical interaction, if you find that things are not working, or if they are working, then any feedback will be very welcome to both myself and Helen moving forward. But I think we're months away from any physical interaction yet. I suspect that things will get worse before they get any better, but thank you for indulging me on that one. And any other questions, just let me know. I'm happy to pop back in. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Yeah, is there anybody else before I clarify, ask some questions? No. Okie dokie. Yeah, two points really. On enforcement, there is some, and I'll come back on to when we get to the recommendations. I've picked it up in terms of place shaping recommendations there that Stuart you've flagged up there. And when I come to recommendations, I'll just ask you to repeat those as well, because they're clearly not in the report. And then the ONS committee may wish to consider those to also recommend through to Cabinet as well. Having my head back on again now. So I'll come back on to that. In relation to enforcement, one of the issues that is a constant problem, and it's a fault line, it appears, and I've spoken to Phil Courtier about this in the past, just to have a look to see whether Phil was at the meeting, but I think you're just fielding today, Helen, in terms of the directorship around that, is that we have had cases where planning, or the officers, when they've made the determination, put on a condition. We then, some months later, the application goes through, it's realised, and then the applicant does not proceed with the condition. And then when we've tried to pursue that through parish councils, ward members, etc., picking up a little bit here on Ken's point, we are told that in actual fact it should never have been put on as a condition in the first place because it's completely unenforceable. And this isn't just an isolated incident. And somehow we've got to get a connect going on here between planning and enforcement, what is enforceable at the point that the condition is put on. And there are cases and examples of this that we can quote. So could I just see what your take is on that, Helen?
Yes, of course. I think it's fair to say that we have done a lot of learning on the appropriateness of conditions and making sure they are enforceable, and they are actually something that we can actually make sure is adhered to. We have got a lot of historical conditions which perhaps aren't worded in the way we're talking, you know, way back 5-10 years ago, which may not be as enforceable as we would wish to have seen them. But moving forward, there is a dialogue between our enforcement team and our planning officers to make sure the conditions we are putting on permissions are enforceable. I would just like to add a point that actually, although we do put conditions on, someone can come and vary the conditions. There is an application form which is to vary a condition. So applicants can vary those and they can also be acceptable. So there is that mechanism as well that anybody can apply to vary their conditions. So what we may have agreed at planning committee's condition, someone comes back and varies it, and that is also acceptable in planning terms. Yeah. So there's quite a lot of complexity around that, but I would like to assure you that we have been doing quite a bit of work with officers and the enforcement team to make sure the conditions we are putting on permissions we make now are actually making sure they meet those tests of compliance. But there are some in the system that perhaps technically are more difficult to enforce given the period of time and when they were worded.
Yes, I mean, we're talking about some decisions here within the last couple of years that are not historically based. Quite recent planning conditions that were put on. I'm not talking about the applicant it's a completely different matter. I totally understand, Helen. Applicants can put on their own conditions and can vary those. I'm talking about the conditions that, you know, are put on by planning officers or the planning committee, and quite recent cases as well. And then apparently enforcement say they're unenforceable, and they don't know why planning keeps on putting on that kind of condition. So what I'm going to ask, Alan, actually, I'm on the report here, is that can we have a copy of your process or procedure in terms of how you are now liaising with enforcement in terms of those improvements you've just mentioned? Because there are recent cases and examples around this. And the problem with all of this, you know, as discussed with Phil as well, the MPF, and it's stated within the report as well, quite clearly points to the confidence within the planning system. And then when we have residents that attend planning meetings or parish councils, conditions are put on, they all know these conditions. They might have had issues with the application in the first place. And then 6 months later, it's that they're then told by enforcement, in actual fact, they're unenforceable. It completely undermines the faith and trust in the planning process. And the MPF refers to this, and I know that we've always taken a line that we must ensure that trust and faith is there, because it just undermines it. So I think you'd appreciate that, Helen, that it's quite an important point, and to ensure that you know, we do have a proper process there, because in the first place, if the condition shouldn't have been put on because it's not enforceable, then it simply shouldn't have been put on. So could we have some kind of feedback on that, about the process now that's what's changed in the last couple of years around this?
I would say that's quite operational in how we obviously issue decisions, because actually the onus is on the planning officer to make sure they meet those tests of the conditions. What we have done is just had some internal training sessions on the importance of making sure we have them for you know, people understand, as in the planning officers, that they put their conditions on. So the enforcement team are not checking every condition the planning officer puts on, because it is the planning officer's responsibility to make sure they're called with the right tests. So we don't have a process where every condition is checked with the enforcement team, because that would be onerous, and there has to be accountability with the planning officer. What we have done is internal training to promote the appropriateness of conditions.
Chair, can I also just add two aspects to that, to build on Helen? We have also now introduced a sign-off process, so that all decisions are signed off by a second officer, and part of that is the review of the conditions. And also in terms of the standard conditions that are used by the authority, we did review those as part of the service, and that also included members of the enforcement team, and that reviewed all the standard conditions, and one of the considerations of that was the enforceability of those conditions, and that did remove a number of older style conditions which were considered at that time not to be enforceable. Those have now been removed from the standard condition lists.
And when did this occur, Stuart?
That was towards the back end of last year.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Okay, and then of course also we could also have the item, perhaps Helen, we can discuss this back on ONS, up for perhaps you know, a bit of a review and scrutiny around it if need be. But we'll park that one where it is at the moment. Right, so back on to the substantive, and also just picking up on the point here about planning. I've picked this up that the planning department is moved, or to be moved, decision's been made down to South Norfolk via a rumour. And I think as a councillor, I'm a little bit nonplussed by that. And I'm putting on my overview and scrutiny head here as well. I'm not quite sure how we can have such a move happen, and then how it's actually going to be practically implemented in terms of residents meeting or us meeting, not actually gone through with councillors or explained, and it's all goes around in a rumour house. There's been no official response or explanation of this to councillors. I think it's an appropriate thing to say at scrutiny, actually. Also, of course, operational decisions are operational decisions under admin. But of course, we also have operational decisions which cross over service provision. Service provision also comes in the remit of elected members in terms of operational matters, supporting the service provision that we want. So one could argue it's not above your pay grade, Dana. So one could argue that. I'm not quite sure about that, but of course, because we've had no details around this, it's very hard to have any thoughts about it.
Debbie Lorrimer would like to come in.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, Chair. We did send an email out on the 4th of September to all members, Chair, detailing what was going to happen and the rationale as to why we're doing it, and the primary sites for services, recognising that we obviously do need to continue to make sure that we provide a service for visitors, our customers and members. So where this is all about feedback that we've had from services, from the wellbeing, from our staff, the wellbeing surveys, where teams are saying they very much want to come together, recognising that we can't bring everybody back into one place, but we're lucky enough to have 2 sites. So splitting those together so we can bring teams together so that they can learn from each other and start to build a real team spirit together. And that's very much coming from our staff. We absolutely recognise that we need to be there and provide the service for our members. But as people said, when they pop up sometimes just for meetings, that doesn't necessarily mean a member of the staff is available anyway, because they could well be out on site and being planning officers, etc. But certainly our intention is to continue to provide the service we do for members. But yes, we did send an email out on the 4th of September. We've also discussed it at the CEC committee as well as part of our return to the work plans, return to the offices plans too. So we have tried to ensure that members are informed.
Yeah, this email on the 4th of September, are there any other committee members here that have seen that email or recollect it?
It did go to all members, Chair.
Yeah, I've seen it, Steve.
Okay. Who is that?
Councillor King.
Thank you. So, and that was talking about planning moving down to South Norfolk.
It was just planning.
I think it was a couple. It was, as I recall, it was only a couple of lines. It wasn't exactly very detailed. No, it was informative. It was fine for information, but it wasn't exactly detailed. Obviously, it's very difficult to bring up the emails when you're actually trying to use the same iPad for conducting the meeting. It does make it very, very tricky. I'm realising now I just had my thumb over the camera the whole time because I'm trying to do that.
Chair, we can recirculate the email if that helps.
Yeah, I mean, do recirculate it, please. Sue, what was you going to say? Sue Holland?
Yes, I'm looking at it, I think, member update. And while it does talk about the elections team now primarily based at the lodge, surveying the staff, which has said there's a desire to bring teams back together wherever possible, I can't actually see anything specific in here about planning.
There was an attachment that went with it that identified where each service would primarily be.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. So,
my only comment would be, I think it was quite a long email, and it's not ever so specific on there. But my other comment would be, it needs to be more widely talked about amongst councillors, frankly, because you say, well, when we come in for a meeting, the officer may not be there. That I've never had that experience. Whenever I've gone to planning, I've been able to talk to somebody about the item that I'm wanting to talk about. So I've never had a problem with that. I do worry that the service we provide to our residents will be curtailed to some extent if we cannot face-to-face talk with those officers, because I have been shown bigger plans that I'm able to look at and we're able to discuss things quite thoroughly. I don't really see why I would have to make an appointment to do that necessarily. I've never had to before, and it doesn't seem to me that it's really appropriate. I mean, obviously, if they are busy, well, then that's a different thing. But I've never had that experience, and I am concerned that we're talking about Broadland planning, which is in an area in Broadland, and that we're moving our planning officers to South Norfolk. And it worries me, frankly. It worries me that we're not providing the service that we should be providing if we go ahead with that on a long-term basis.
Thank you, sir.
No, I completely agree. On the attachment which I've now brought up, it says reference 1, place team planning, lodge presence, house primary. As I said, it gives you the information that that's happening, but there's absolutely zero detail other than that. On the front page, there's a lot of explanation. But yeah, honestly, I don't feel it's good enough.
Okie dokie.
Tony
Okay.
Adams wish to speak.
Tony?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I think, as you know, I keep saying I've been on the council for a long time, and I think this is certainly detrimental to our residents in Broadland, who we were all elected to represent. Every single one of us, whether you're a cabinet member or whether you're just a member. And I think this will definitely make the service work worse to our residents, which I certainly wasn't elected to do. I certainly had no knowledge of this. It's never been discussed anywhere else, which it should have been before this was implemented. And as I say, I think it's also detrimental to councillors who are trying to do a job, and now will have that job made even more difficult as a result of this. And I think this needs to be revisited, and revisited quickly, in my opinion, Chairman, because I have no doubt that it is a detrimental effect on our residents and a detrimental effect on the members who are trying to represent those residents effectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Yeah, I mean, part of the issue with all of this is again, we're now kind of, because of the way this has happened, I do need us to get back onto, of course, back onto the substantive here in terms of the report. But just on this matter, so we can try to move on from it, is why. So again, councillors, why? Is this to do with efficiency? I'm hearing that there could be a possibility from yourself, Helen, that there could be appointments back in Broadland. You know, we're talking about turnaround time here of an hour and a half from South Norfolk to Broadland, which is dead time when officers can't do any planning work. There'd also be, 45p a mile from South Norfolk to Broadland. I'm not understanding any of this. Nothing is clear to me. Why and for what purpose? Is it efficient? Is it not efficient? Nothing is actually being explained whatsoever. And I think Tony and the other councillors are right, bearing in mind that, you know, we have residents, you know, and we have to represent residents as well. And also it's about service provision. So service provision in terms of, you know, planning officers, servicing planning in terms of Broadland is a service provision, which is also an elected executive member decision as well. One could argue, I would say. So I don't know how on earth we're going to deal with this. Clearly, we've got an issue here around it. And I'm not quite sure how we're going to deal with this other than at full council, perhaps. So I don't know if there's any suggestions from officers here about how we can actually have a full and frank explanation, etc. I just don't know. Is there any suggestions?
It's already on the agenda at SEAC, Steve. It's part of their remit, and we've already discussed it at the SEAC committee. So it's being picked up through that route.
It's being picked up from SEAC to discuss after the decision's been made?
No, we've been briefing them in the last meetings that we've had with them.
And place shaping?
It comes under the SEAC remit.
Not place shaping. Well, okay, all right. I think that councillors, we're obviously going to have to come to our own thoughts and do what we think necessary in order to get some transparency around the issue, because it is a transparency issue. And I'm stating
Chairman,
that very
there's
clearly.
some members who would like to speak.
All right,
Councillor
thank you.
Nurden, Councillor Bullman and Councillor Emsell.
Okay, I was going to take you first, Councillor Emsell, and then I'll take Borman and Grant. Sorry, Peter and Grant.
I was just liking to say that obviously I'm hearing that obviously the members' concerns, but I was under the impression that everybody was aware of the changes that were happening, that emails have gone out with explanations into how the service is being, you know, how things are going on there. So I'm a little bit concerned that obviously there is a concern that there's a problem, but at the moment I don't actually know what the problem is. As far as I know, there is still more working from home. So with regards to the officers, they're if they've got to go to somewhere in Aylsham, for instance, they're not driving all the way to South Norfolk only to drive all the way back up to Aylsham. There's more planning and more organisation in their department than I think the members are giving them credit for. So it is that they know where they've got to cover. We've just had the map out of where the officers cover, which areas they cover, and it sounds like to me that members are sort of saying that they're all driving, everybody's driving all the way down to South Norfolk first thing in the morning and then driving all the way back up to Aylsham for their first meeting. That won't be how it's happening. The new ways of working mean that they're working from home. They've got Broadland as an office, they've got South Norfolk as an office. They can work from wherever needs to be done to make the whole system work. And I just think that the officers and the team, you know, that they've been working on how it best works for them at this time and obviously moving forward. And with the situation of the office-based work compared with homework-based work, there is a lot of work being done behind the scenes. And I did believe that the emails coming out did explain what was happening. And like I say, I am aware of these things. And for me, it's where we're talking about this is a problem, but at the moment, I don't see that there's any specific problem, apart from the fact that members are sort of saying that if officers aren't at Broadland, that will be a problem for them, but members aren't going into Broadland at the moment anyway.
About future, we're talking about the future, Jonathan, aren't we? So I'm just going to actually, because I'm looking at time here, I can hear what you're saying, Jonathan.
Yeah, I know, and that's what we're working at in service improvement and efficiency. We are looking at new ways of working and how we work things, but at the moment it's a very movable feast, because we were all talking about the plan was to see how we could get more officers back into the office in September, and then all of a sudden the government was saying work from home still. So at the moment this is a long-term plan to see how things are, but as far as I know, the officers were working on what was going to work best for them, and then passing that information out to say to members, this is what's happening, so that you know. And now members are sort of saying they know nothing about it, and I think it's a bit that the officers are trying their best in difficult circumstances, and I think just to give them some time to see how things work would be better than saying it's all wrong, they shouldn't have done it, we don't know what's going on, is not the way forward. So thank you.
Okay, Jonathan, it's all right saying, I have to say that, it's all right saying that's not the way forward. If councillors don't know what's going on, they don't know what's going on. And in this situation, I'm still confused, Jonathan. I really am. You might know what's going on. You're having clear discussions from what you're telling me. This is actually, you know, a planning issue. The portfolio holder for that is not you anyway. I'm really confused about this. And also, SEAC is not making decisions around this, is it? It has no decision-making function. If it was to make decisions around it, which it can't, this is the other confusing thing that's coming in around SEAC. SEAC cannot make decisions. So therefore, decisions made elsewhere. There might be some information going back through SEAC, I don't know. But if there's recommendations coming out of SEAC, they have to come back through the process, as any panel does. And I've not seen them come to Cabinet or anywhere else. So the whole thing is confused. It just is. Otherwise, we wouldn't be saying what we're saying. So there was two other members wishing to speak, and I'm going to have to move on, which was Peter and, Grant. Peter?
Chairman, I think what we have here is a so-called operational decision, which actually is strategic. And I think there could be little doubt that most members, leaving aside the cabinet, were not fully aware of what the implications of that email were. Frankly, it's a bit like almost, I don't want to take this wrongly, a little like an aside. Now, I think this is a strategic issue, and I think it ought to have been debated in open. Whether or not the answer is the correct answer, I'm not sure. Clearly, there's benefits in working together, and I wouldn't want to look at the conclusion before we have all the evidence. I'm just concerned about the process, because it's being treated as a purely operational matter, and it isn't, it's strategic. Yes. So frankly, I think we really do need to voice our concern, and I do recognise we're going well off the agenda, but that's your fault, Chairman. You introduced it.
Well, I think
I'm not blaming you, by the way.
No, I appreciate that.
I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, I know, and I think that every point you've made there is spot on, Peter. By the way, it was another member that actually asked a question around this, which then, of course, has led us on to it. But Grant, over to you, Grant.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It was before the actual start of the place shaping panel meeting last night that I did raise this issue, but it was too short a time period for us to have a decent conversation about it. As Vice Chairman of the Service Improvement and Efficiency Committee, I do recall that we were discussing the issues around restructuring the planning department as such, but I don't recall anything about a move of or a making of a permanent base down to South Norfolk. And one of the things that does concern me, of course, is that are we going to have a bulging staff complement at South Norfolk House? Can they accommodate all the planning team there? Are we going to end up with a situation that when things do go back to normal, that there is going to be an empty or a virtually empty Thorpe Lodge? It is a concern that I have, and I'm glad that it has been raised, and I fully support everything that has been said about the concerns of members. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So to try to move forward on this, I have asked officers if they can actually reflect on the conversation and then perhaps have thoughts about coming back to councillors in terms of full disclosure and what's this all about, and the need for it, reasons for it. And all we can do at this point in time, I think, committee with our concerns, is to ask officers to reflect on that and to hopefully come back on it. In the meantime, of course, as councillors, we also, of course, can also have our own thoughts about about mechanisms for raising this ourselves and other means and other ways, I guess, within the council. And with that comment, I think we're probably going to have to move on now back to the substantive. Excuse me.
Just a quick comment, Chairman.
Yeah.
How about we have it as an agenda item for the next overview and scrutiny committee?
We can do. We can do. As we've got our work program. We've got our next ONS meeting, but clearly this matter is one of the moment. So we could actually say that we would require a report coming through to us there to give some explanation and to flesh this out. We could do that. Is that agreed? I'd second that.
Agreed.
Agreed.
It does look as if members are in agreement, Chairman.
Agreed.
Did you say that's unanimous? Yes.
It looks to be unanimous, Chairman, yes.
Thank you. Okie dokie. All right. Well, we'll move back now back on to the recommendations on enforcement. Just looking for the page. I think it's 347, is it? Recommendations, page 347. Yes, and so we have recommendation 1 and 2 to agree the use of the enforcement plan at Appendix 1 for the Planning Enforcement Service at Brawley Council. 2, to ensure the use of the enforcement strategy Appendix 2 for Planning Enforcement Service at Brawley Council. Plus, there's also, which I'll just ask Stuart to just recap on the points in a distinct way from the panel meeting. If you could just do that, and perhaps we could also include them as well. Stuart, could you just...
Yes, Chair. So the points I highlighted were in relation to Appendix 2 on page 355, relating to the options available to the Council in terms of formal action, to provide headings to those sections, and also to incorporate a flowchart outlining the enforcement process and options available. And in relation to the training, to clarify that in addition to member training, that will be available to parish councils.
Thank you. James, have you got that?
I have indeed, yes, Chairman.
Wonderful. So could we also endorse from Scrutiny those points as well? So therefore we would be adding, we'd be amending 2, wouldn't we, James, I believe?
It'd be subject to the recommendations of the place shaping panel, and I'll set those out.
Okay, yeah, exactly, brilliant. Okay, so could we all agree with those recommendations? Move.
That looks to be unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Right, moving on to back to the item I went to move on to originally, which is item 12, budget update report.
Excuse me, Chairman. Before we move on, I'm conscious that at least one member's joined since the meeting started. So if that member could declare whether they've got any interest, please.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Councillor King.
Yeah, so I've got no interest in any of the items on the agenda.
Thank you. Are we clear
I believe
now?
Councillor Elmsell as well has joined.
Yeah.
Nothing to declare.
Thank you.
Anyone else, Sue? Are we clear now?
I believe that's everyone. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So item 12, budget update, leader officer Rodney Fincham, page 40. Would you like to amplify, please, Rodney? And welcome to the meeting, by the way.
Thank you, Chair. So, as members will be aware, we normally update budgets every year in February time, but this has been quite an exceptional year, so we thought it's worthwhile bringing to members an update on some key issues relating to the budget. So this report is very much a chance to update members on some of the things that are going on and ask for a number of specific decisions. What I'd like to do, if it's okay with the chair, is to go through each of the sections and then pause briefly for any questions on that section, just so we can try and take this, because there are quite a lot of different elements to this report, and that might be a sensible way to tackle this report, if that's okay, Chair.
I think there's no other way around it, really, Rodney, so I appreciate that. So you're going to move on to section 1, yeah?
So yes, the first thing, I'll do a brief introduction to each of the sections and then pause for questions. So very much section 1 on page 41 of the report is very much asking members to agree that we can increase our capital budget to enable the rollout of laptops. Obviously, with the current sort of COVID epidemic, that it's important for officers to be able to work from home or potentially go into the office occasionally. And it's just part of our new ways of working to enable officers to be far more flexible. So when there's a need to be at Thorpe Lodge, they can work efficiently at Thorpe Lodge. When there's a need to work at South Norfolk House, they can work efficiently there. And equivalently, when they need to work from home, they can work from home. So very much for asking for member approval to increase the capital budget by 115,000 to fund the rollout of these additional laptops. Question, Councillor Holland?
Sue?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've read this and I'm quite interested in this idea of providing laptops, and I think it's obviously an excellent idea, but I am mildly concerned that the new ways of working don't appear to cover the members. And it does occur to me, and I have said this several times, I'm afraid, and I keep being told it's going to be looked at, but it hasn't been so far. It is almost impossible to deal with 370 pages of a document on an iPad. You can't compare pages, you can't do anything. What I really want to know is, what consideration is being given in the budget to setting aside monies to provide laptops rather than iPads for members, which I'm afraid I do consider is really important. Thank you.
Debbie.
Laura, yeah.
Fire away, Debbie.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on Councillor Holland's really good point, we are preparing a subsequent budget paper which will be coming to a next Cabinet, which will include asking for or requesting a budget for us to do that piece of work around members' IT, so that we can take that forward. So we recognise that, and that will be coming forward in the next Cabinet reports after this one. Not this on this agenda, but next meeting's agenda.
Tony Adams has his hand raised.
Tony?
Yeah, well said, Suze. You're spot on, because when I read this report, again, there's not a single mention of members included in this whatsoever. We've been pushing now from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee and members as a whole for an improvement in our technology, and we're still nowhere with it. Sorry, Jonathan, if this upsets you. It is a fact, and when I read this report, I must admit I got quite annoyed, and I don't know, in the light of what has already been said, this is the right way to go about it, but I would wish to amend recommendation 1 to actually read to increase the Broadland District Council 2021 information technology capital budget by the amount required to fund the rollout of additional laptops, to include the 47 members of the council, and also to include Microsoft Office 365 installed, to better facilitate the new ways of working for both officers and members. Thank you, Chairman. And I'm putting that forward as an official amendment, Chairman. I will always withdraw it if I get suitable assurances that this is going to happen.
And I'll second that.
Oh, it's going to happen sometime in the future, because I think we've had enough of that.
Okay, so I've got that, Tony. I've also picked up the seconder for that as well. So we just park that at the moment because we need to have the debate, but we've got that and come back onto recommendations we usually do at the end. Also, if I could just clarify, and if we move to page, sorry, yes. So where we started with this, I mean, Sue made the point here. This goes back a year ago. We was at the pre-budget scrutiny process, and there we raised also this issue about the iPads as well, because I think new members also need to be aware of where all this came from. We used to be provided with paper, and we used to be provided with a monetary sum, an allowance for the 4 years. We used to receive that in terms of IT, so we'd use our own laptops or whatever, printers, etc. at points in time. that was removed on the basis that we'd go paperless and we'd have electronic apparatus supplied now, which would be iPads. The reality is of iPads, they are dysfunctional for councillors. They are. And they're dysfunctional in a number of ways. It's not just ONS, it's also planning as well. We know the members on planning, you've got documents that are actually have more content than what we've got at this meeting. And to go through that on an iPad, to be quite frank, is appalling. Also, you can never actually get up on your iPad documents while you're at a Zoom meeting. Dysfunctional again. We are not being equipped with, and it is an inhibitor to what we do. Also, if we want to do any serious work, we've got a screen here to type on. iPads were never designed for this kind of thing, this kind of purpose. I'm also noticing from this, quite obviously, that there's no recommendation here for iPads for officers because they're dysfunctional. You can't actually work with them. This has been going on for a year. Now, a year ago, we asked if a members user group could be set up to review this. It's a year later and it still hasn't been done. And there has been reminders put into the admin about it. I'll pick up your point, Debbie, about you're going to look at this and come back with a budget, but that's actually saying nothing to us at all. And today I'm quite surprised that we've got a report here, which is, very well flushed out in terms of the need, which I support, by the way, for the officers. I can understand this. But at the same time, members should be included in this as well. And it's a simple premise, isn't it? Because when you go to what we're talking about here, I'm just going to ask a question. Sue, I've got you marked down. I'm just going to ask a question. We're talking about a split of 45% and 55% for these 219 laptops. We're talking about laptops with also the sporting apparatus that go with them as well, as I can read. So the split for us on the 45% basis is 115,000. Just doing a quick calculation on this, Rodney, that breaks down to, for Broadland, I know you can't exactly do this, but if you do the same 45 split for Broadland laptops and officers, it's coming out to around about £1,161. On percentage figures, it works out 98.55 officers, so I've rounded it up to 99. And that's coming out £1,161. That £1,161, is that the total cost for the laptops and all the kit, or is there also some factor in there around associated costs with 365? I wouldn't have thought so. Could you just clarify that for me, Rodney?
You're right. That is the sort of the cost we're looking at. It very much is the laptop, the peripheries, making sure it's got all the relevant software on, and we've included some allowance to actually get these rolled out, some staff time to actually roll these out as quickly as possible. And there is also I think it's a 20% contingency built into those figures as well. So actually, if we don't need to use that contingency, then actually that cost will come down.
Exactly. Thank you. I thought that, but I had to just clarify it with you on my maths here as well. On my very small calculator. So on that basis, if we have a look at 44 on Tony's proposition here, on the 47 councillors, we're talking about £54,000 on that basis. However, I'm not sure that the councillors need all the peripheral gear to go with this anyway. So I think that cost would come down. Also, the 20% contingency cost would come down. And I'm thinking this is probably going to be somewhere in the region of around about 48. But we also, of course, would need to factor into this the fact that we're 1.5 years into our iPads. They are due to be replaced in 2.5 years' time. I don't know what Broadland pay for the iPads. I'm guessing they're around about £200 each, possibly more. So if you factor that money in, because I know you'd have to come up with a budget this year, but it's a one-off payment. It's not a reoccurring on the budget. That actually means that the cost for us, factoring that in, removing the replacement of iPads, comes down to somewhere around about £35,000. Now, we're talking about a figure here of £35,000. When you look at our reserve of disposable reserve of 12 million, that comes out at 0.4% of a percent. 0.4% of a percent. And yet we're about to go into a real exercise here, as Debbie's explained, to have a look at this and come up with a budget. Really? I mean, 0.4% of a percent out of our reserves for supporting our members and for getting this done. This should simply be rolled out now. We can afford it. If we look at our annual budget, it actually comes out, because it's only on the annual basis, it'd come out at virtually zero over a 4-year term, 0.1%. It's absolutely ridiculous. And on that basis, I completely support what Tony has said, financially and for our user. And honestly, this year has been completely wasted, and we should just move forward and do this now with the roll-up. I completely support it. And we'll come back onto that when we get to recommendations. Sue, you did want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I know it has been discussed at CEC. I was there. I mentioned at least twice, and at night, and I kept being told it was going to be discussed later, but the members were still not mentioned. So what I don't understand is why there is such a resistance to this. But given the financial implications, why is everybody obsessed about us using iPads? I just don't get it. There is no workplace in this country and probably in the world where you work on an iPad. Words fail me. So I really hope we do something about this, and soon. Thank you.
And it's certainly affordable, because I also noticed in the report, it's affordable anyway. Anybody else before we move on to section 2? We'll come back on the recommendations on this, Tony. Anybody
Councillor
else?
King wishes to speak.
Yes, David.
Oh, pressing the wrong buttons. Yeah, thank you very much. Now, I've got 2 comments. Firstly, my biggest issue with the iPads, which I've taken up with IT and I've mentioned it to Basin, is that it won't sync up with any of my diaries. So, Chairman of Hells and Parish Council requires quite a few meetings in a month. Sitting on Oldcastle Parish Council, usually there's 2 or 3 things with that as well. Because the diaries don't sync up, I occasionally agree to attend meetings that double book me somewhere else because I cannot, there's no way of getting the BlackBerry diary to communicate with my other 2 diaries. It's just not possible. So that is my biggest problem with the iPad. Obviously, this morning I'm struggling trying to conduct a meeting on an iPad because I'm actually trying to do what my personal laptop is actually doing some background work this morning on my account system, doing an update. So until that's done, I can't actually use that. So I'm causing, obviously now, this is really quite difficult for me because it's the first time I've actually done it for a large meeting, and I can only see 9 people on the screen in one go. And I think there's 3 screens worth of people. So that makes it a little bit more cumbersome. So that's one of my problems with the iPad, and I really do agree that we really should be getting laptops. But going back to the agenda item itself, item 1.5, 27-inch monitors, that seems awfully excessive. And what do we actually have on our iPads? What's that, 11 inches or something? I can't see the justification of 27-inch monitors. Surely cheaper monitors means a lower cost. Smaller monitors would be a cheaper cost. And my working out is a Dell G3 15-inch monitor, which is a high spec gaming laptop, is £769. You won't need that sort of speed and the sort of laptop that we'll need for officers. I can't understand how, with all these things being added together, we come to over £1,100. I redid all my IT system in my office this year, giving all my staff laptops to work from, and that worked out at less than £600, including higher spec i5 processors in all the machines. I can't see how we're looking at double what I believe would be reasonable.
Okay, Dave. I've
Debbie wishes to come in.
Yeah, I've also just picked up on the chat here, Debbie, and so I'm going to ask Sue Catchbowl to come in first because there might be something, Debbie, you want to pick up from that as well. So Sue first, and then Debbie.
Thank you, Chair. It's a very brief comment, but I was elected in 2018, which is 2 years ago, and I was given an iPad at that point, but under the understanding that it was being reviewed and probably we'll be getting laptops anytime soon. So this isn't 1 year, this is 2 years this has been going on, and I really wish we had a laptop to work on. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Debbie?
Yes, in terms of the equipment, we've obviously taken the advice from our IT professionals, who work with us. So Tom and Chris have fed into that spec. Some of the reasons why we need bigger screens are for people who are looking at plans and some of the big documents on there, the Excel spreadsheets, because people will be using their laptop screen as the other alternative screen, so working off 2 screens. So that's the reason for the bigger screens. It's not just screens for the number of laptops. There's a reason why we need to buy and standardise on screens across the whole of our workforce, really, so that it's easy for IT and for us to have the connections to people's laptops. So it's not just a screen per laptop. There's other stuff on there. Bits and pieces that make it work entirely. There's wireless keyboards and mice as well for COVID security, so people can keep their own wireless keyboard and mouse so that people aren't cross-contaminating. So there's other bits and pieces that are peripheral to the supply of the laptops included as well.
Thank you, Debbie. Okie dokie. So we'll come back onto recommendations. As said.
Councillor Brennan.
Hello, Nigel. You there?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you. Councillor King has actually raised part of my question was going to be. What I find strange is going back to 1.5 again. In addition to provision of laptops, we supply laptop bags, well, that makes a lot of sense. Wireless keyboards and mice. Yeah, I can go with a mouse because I have one and it makes it very easy. But why do you need a wireless keyboard on a laptop? It comes with basically a full-size keyboard. So these wireless keyboards aren't particularly expensive overall, but why do you need an extra one? And then going back to the monitor problem, I mean, we're sitting at home, I know we're being paid as councillors, but we're expected to use our own equipment to be able to conduct these meetings with broadband provision. But if I want to have a bigger screen, all I have to do is plug my laptop into my 60-inch television, and this just seems bizarre that all this money is being wasted. And the final question, please. This is those really have to do with IT, perhaps rather than finance. But where is this 115,000 coming from? Is it being taken out of some other budget? Because I don't believe we've been told that. We're just being asked to provide another £115,000. Where is it coming from, please? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. If we could just have some answers to that, please. Is that Rodney?
So if I can just come in there, very much the idea is a laptop keyboard is not ideal for actually using on a constant basis. Yeah. It's far easier to have a keyboard that you can place in the correct position for when you're working on it constantly. And also having it wireless, it will mean officers can transport it from home into the office as needed, which is obviously very important as we don't want people sharing keyboards during the COVID pandemic. So, there was another point regarding how this money is going to be funded. I'll draw members' attention to paragraph 1.8, and this is where we're suggesting that as this council has some unspent COVID-19 grant money, this could be used to actually fund the rollout of laptops.
So, sorry, Chair, sorry, Rodney, does that mean we've actually got £115,000 in the COVID-19 grant that we hadn't spent, the whole 115,000?
Correct.
Right, thank you. And again, sorry to hog the meeting for a moment, but I'll go back to the point about the keyboard, with greatest respect, I've been using laptops for about the last 20 years. I am quite an intensive user, as my wife keeps reminding me. You're always on that computer. I never have a problem using a laptop keyboard. Never have. And I will sit there. So yeah, sorry. I know we're getting very tied up with this, but what concerns me is that all of this is being pushed out. And going back to what Susan said, and Sue Catchpole, we were promised laptops a long time ago, and we're still not getting them. And our need is just as great as officers, in my humble opinion.
And I think just to come back on that, if I can, obviously, I think this is what the Director of Resources mentioned at the meeting. Actually, this is recognised by officers that there is a similar need for councillors. We were proposing to come back to the next meeting with this, but obviously it will be up to overviewing scrutiny if they wish to actually recommend to Cabinet to actually build that extra budget in this time, and that will be something I'm sure that the Cabinet will listen to. And obviously there are a number of members of Cabinet in this meeting who I'm sure will be taking this on board.
Thank you, Rodney. Just a quick one. I totally understand the issue in terms of the keyboards. It's actually a health and safety executive issue. This one, having taken a number of employers to court on behalf of employees for repetitive strain injury, carpal tunnel syndrome in relation to keyboard usage, they're required. The council has to provide them. It's not a choice for us, actually, in terms of the repetitive strain injuries on carpal tunnel. We have to do it. So I understand that.
Yeah, I concur, because I've encountered that in the civil service prior to this as well. But
could I just because we must move on, we're actually running out of time. Just in relation to the 115,000, is it precisely 115,000, Rodney, or is it in excess of 115,000, the COVID underspend?
So there is additional money left out of COVID, more than the 115,000. I don't have that figure to hand, but it is certainly
it may well also cover the additional to the councillor iPads as well.
There would be sufficient to cover that as well. Yes.
But just do it.
So we've established there's enough money to cover both as well. Thank you very much. Okay, well, you must move on now, Councillor.
Would you like, Chairman, for me just to read my
amended
recommendation?
Tony, what I've said is, and I do this every time. When we've got these when we've got sections, we come back for the final recommendations and we finish. So I've got that. I've done it before. I did it with Peter on one as well at a previous meeting. So we'll come back on your one at the end. So if you can just keep it noted, and then I'll come back to that when we get to recommendations. Don't worry, we will be putting that to the committee, and I'll come back on that when we get to final recommendations. So if we can move on to section 2, please. Now,
thank you, Chair.
Could I just ask something? Are you picking up any background noise from my iPad? Because I've actually got some building work going on, and I'm picking it up, and it's getting louder. Could you just give me 5 minutes? Tony, could you just take over on this section 2 for me? It's page 42. I'll be 2 minutes, okay?
Yeah. Okay. Oh, sorry about that, Rodney. If you can carry on with the second part of your report, thanks very much.
Will do. So this is very much section 2 on page 42 of the papers. Obviously, at the full council, we recently agreed a new sort of a environmental strategy. There was some concern raised by members whether we had sufficient resources to actually deliver that strategy. So this report is very much coming back and asking members to increase the annual revenue budget by £44,000 to allow a new permanent role of environment strategy coordinator. And again, I will pause for questions.
Right. Any questions, anybody on this particular report? If you have, please show your hand. Judy, I believe you want to come in and comment. If you'd like to come in, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, I just want to say I'm delighted with this, and that we are actually going to get some dedicated money to actually further our environmental strategy, which I know is important for most of us and also for our residents. So I'm delighted with this. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Judy. Anybody else? You're all happy with the report? Yes, Sue.
Thank you. Just to agree with Judy, I think it's not before time, and I'm glad to see that we'll have somebody focusing on our intended improvements in the environmental area. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. Anybody else before we move on? No, right, okay. Well, Rodney, you got away with that one. Move on to the next part of your report, please.
So section 3 is very much a tidy up regarding the waste budget. We did set aside some money to actually progress with the joint waste project. Obviously, with recent decisions, we're now progressing with a contract for the BDC waste service. So this is very much a tidy up to be able to say, let's use that money to fund the costs associated with running this procurement. And again, I should pause for any quick questions.
All right, any questions to Rodney? I haven't seen any hands go up anywhere. Oh, yeah, right, Susan Holland.
Hello, yes, thank you, Chair. Or Vice Chair. I was interested in work to develop options to improve the Frettenham depot. Will we necessarily need the Frettenham depot? I wasn't sure. I thought I'd understood that may not be a factor, but I may have misunderstood that. Clarification would be helpful, thank you.
Jamie Sutterby wants to comment.
Councillor Holland, thank you for the question. Yes, I mean it's fair to say that the facilities at Frettenham are pretty antiquated and not presenting a great setup for staff, whether there are staff or contracted. Logistically, it's not in a very optimal position either. We are going to need to have a depot base from which to run our operation, and that's part of the considerations that we're working with Councillor Leggett on in terms of how we position the contract to the market. I think longer term we'll need to look. We are starting to look at, from a project point of view, all options around the Frettenham depots. That could range from revamp and repair through to finding a new site which is more optimally located, but might carry a heavier investment tab, but might present some operational efficiency. So at the moment, all options are on the table, and we'll report back into the respective policy committee and then through to cabinet for decisions at the appropriate time. I hope that answers your question.
Very helpful, thank you.
Thanks, Rodney.
So
before I hand back to Steve, to the chairman, anybody else wish to speak? Right, okay, over to you now, Steve. You're back in command.
Thank you, Chair. So we'll move on to the next section then, please, Rodney.
Right, so next section of the report is section 4 on page 43. So these are all to do with changes relating to COVID. The first one is about a need for additional support in our regulatory services area. And in paragraph 4.5, we mentioned that actually the senior officer team have already approved these additional resources. We considered it was essential to actually get this money up and running and get these resources in to help support our response in this area. So very much we're asking for a retrospective agreement through members to support the decision of the corporate management team to do this. If I just move on each of the sections in here, section B on this is very much, members may remember that actually we set aside £100,000 to give direct hardship payments to residents who might be actually struggling really financially. In reality, what has happened is we actually were able to actually give people food parcels or other support. So the demand to spend this money hasn't been as high as we've expected. So at the end of September, we'd actually only spent £13,000 out of this budget. We therefore got some additional budget that isn't going to be needed, and what we're suggesting is that we return this to actually cover the cost of the council tax discounts, which again members maybe remember we have an obligation to reduce people's council tax bills by £150 if they're on a working age support. So very much this is to move that budget back from the direct hardship payments to cover the cost of this sort of £150 discounts. The third section is very much the income compensation scheme. Very much when this pandemic started, we actually said we're going to be losing potentially £430,000 of income for the council. Therefore, we actually reduced our budgets accordingly to make sure our budgets were realistic. We then had the announcement from government that they will actually compensate us for some of this lost income. And our best estimate is out of that £415,000 lost income, we should be able to claim back about £215,000 from government. It's therefore necessary to adjust the budgets to reflect this additional income being received from government. The fourth section is very much for members to note something that's coming up. So as members will be aware, obviously there's now been national announcements about if there's a local restrictions in an area, there's additional ability to pay grants to those businesses to help with the closure. At the moment, this is very much only affecting authorities in tier 3 or tier 2 of the lockdown, which fortunately Norfolk isn't. But actually, if there does become the need for us to pay these grants out, we'll want to be able to respond really quickly to get this money out to the businesses that need it. And therefore, we're just asking members to note that under the current delegations, we will be asking the portfolio holder for economic development to approve any criteria for these additional grants. And the fifth section of this, section E on page 46, again, members may be aware in the news where the government on the 8th of October agreed £60 million worth of surge funding to boost coronavirus enforcement. So £30 million of this went to the police, £30 million has come to local authorities, and our allocation at BDC is £49,000. Again, we're very much wanting to actually get this sport and up and running, and we're just asking for the agreement that the Assistant Director of Regulatory is authorised to spend this money in order to actually improve our enforcement activity. And I think I shall pause there for any questions.
Thank you, Rodney. Yes, any questions? Caroline?
Can I go back to the hardship direct payments, Rodney? The £13,000 spent, does that include money spent for food parcels for the vulnerable?
No, that isn't. That's actually where we've physically paid people out money because actually they had a desperate need for some money to pay something. So it excludes costs of food parcels, which is funded elsewhere.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? No, so we'll move on. Thank you,
Councillor Nurden indicating.
Okay, Grant, far away.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'm looking at paragraph, E46 to 426 to 431, and I'm trying to understand what is, okay, you're asking for, we've been given 49,421, and it talks about what a council can do to spend this money. I'm just very curious to know, what are we as a council, Broadland District Council, going to be doing with this money? Because I wouldn't want us to be in a situation like you have with the hardship fund, where you've been given a budget of 25,000 and you've only spent, where you've been given 100,000 and you've only been able to spend 13,000 or whatever. If we've got that money, we need to put processes in place or actions in place that we're actually going to use it for the purpose for which it was intended. So I would just like to be comforted to know that we have actually drawn up plans on how we're going to spend this money proactively, productively, effectively.
So I think this is very much, I might ask Nick to come in a minute, but I think it's worth pointing out to start with, actually, this money has been allocated to us specifically to be spent on COVID-related compliance and enforcement activities. That's the only reason we can spend it. And one of the reasons we're actually asking for this agreement is so we can actually get on and spend it quickly without having to come back to members. And if we had to do that, it might delay us being able to deliver these activities. I don't know, Nick, if you want to come in on any particular points you want to say about what we're going to spend the money on.
Chairman and Councillor, thank you very much for the question. We're not seeing high rates of non-compliance with COVID controls, but we're seeing an awful lot of uncertainty in businesses as to precisely what they should and shouldn't do, can and can't do in order to protect the public. So as our challenge increases going into the autumn, we expect to see more questions arise and more needs to be out and about supporting businesses on the ground. So there's an awful lot of work being done already, which is very COVID targeted to support businesses, but we do know that we're going to have to provide some additional COVID support and potentially some enforcement. We expect the enforcement needs to be quite low, but we as yet don't know for sure in relation to businesses. When it comes to how residents comply with the rules that they are exposed to, then it's slightly more uncertain, because there we're working very closely with the police, who've got the primary enforcement responsibilities. So we will see a range of needs emerge. We don't have a documented plan at this stage because we are watching the rise in patterns of uncertainty in businesses. If we go, for example, from tier 1 to tier 3, then we know that the restrictions will be very different to where they are now. So our expectation is that we will, using our officers, to target those individual sectors and businesses where we've got the greatest concern. And we'll do that in two ways. Firstly, there's some eyes and ears to monitor how businesses are coping. We'll do that in a very supportive way, but occasionally there will be individual businesses who let the side down, and the other businesses who are doing all the right things would expect us to ensure a level playing field. And secondly, we may need to respond to individual complaints, and members of the public will be our eyes and ears largely as to whether things are being done appropriately by businesses or not. So we will be responding sometimes in the nighttime economy to individual locations where there is a compliance issue and we need to step in with enforcement. We'll always do that in a sensitive way. We'll always start by explaining what the requirements are, by engaging people and encouraging them to do the right thing, but occasionally that will require enforcement. So it's a bit of a complex picture at this early stage. I hope to be able to give you updates as we go along, but this resource absolutely does help us to be in the right places when non-compliance is a concern for the public. Thank you.
Thank you. And I picked up on the points as well to Grant's question here about, getting on with it and not having time delays, which I'd certainly understand and support. So is there any other questions? No. Would you like to move on, Rodney?
So section 5 is very much a tidy up exercise, in that actually if you look at our current establishment for the senior management structure, we have a post of assistant director for consultancy team. This has only briefly been filled and is currently vacant. All the responsibilities for this role has actually been absorbed within the chief of staff structure, and therefore we're just asking for permission to actually remove this post from the establishment. As it's a senior post, we need to ask members for this agreement to do this.
Yes, and I do remember the previous director who's in this post as well, who left after a while. It's a significant figure in terms of budget. You're right, it's consultancy, and that's really moved on from the past as well. So again, I would support that. Any other questions? Right. So
in which case, I'll take it to section 6. Obviously, there's an awful lot going on in the financial world for COVID-19 and various changes. So it's obviously just good practice to update our medium-term financial strategy. So very much, I think the key table for me is paragraph 6.7, where you can see the original funding gap that we were reporting back in June and the new funding gap that we're reporting now. So very much for the current year, 2021, we were expecting a surplus of 62,000. With all the changes that we're aware of, we've now still got a surplus of about £100,000 we're expecting in the current year. But longer term, we've still got a budget funding gap of in the region of £1 million, £1.5 million going forward, and that hasn't changed recently. And this is something we'll obviously be looking to address as part of the budget report next year. But the key issue will be, what is our funding settlement when that comes out in December time? And I think.
And of course, the funding settlement, Rodney, as ever, we don't know at the moment when it's going to come out, do we?
We're hoping before Christmas, but there's no guarantee. I'll say it could be Christmas Eve if I'm unlucky.
Okie dokie. I remember one year, it was only about 2 days before that, actually.
Yes.
Yes. So any questions on that? Can we move forward?
Thank you, Chair. That then takes you very much to your recommendations.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so moving to page 50, we do have the recommendations listed there, as you can see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The only variation to this that we've discussed so far is the amendment and proposition put forward by Tony, and that was seconded, I think, by Sue Pruton. I think, oh, Kenny, sorry, Ken. It was seconded by Ken. So Tony, it's now appropriate. Would you like to read out what your amendment was, please?
I'll read it out a bit slower than I did the first time, so people can take note. The amended recommendation one to read to increase the BDC 2021 information technology capital budget by the amount required to fund the rollout of additional laptops to include the 47 members of the council and to also include Microsoft Office 365 pre-installed, better facilities the new ways of working for both officers and members. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Just before we put that to the vote, I'm just going to ask Debbie to come in here on the technology of the 365 provision. Debbie, as I understand it, all operating laptops would be operating to that. Is that the case?
It will be, but when they're first rolled, depending on how quickly we can source them and obviously roll them out. And I would ask that part of the provision is for us to employ some additional people to do this, to roll them up, because they've got to be purchased, set up, and then obviously rolled out to members, which takes a little time to do. The problem of whether you will be on Office 365 as soon as we roll them out, it depends how we're going with the Office 365 rollout, if that makes sense, because obviously that's timetabled and programmed in. We're hoping that will be in very shortly, around the end of the calendar year. But whether we can do that from day one, I can't promise without talking to the technical IT guys, but certainly it will be following very swiftly if it's not there from day one.
So Tony, the reason why I'm saying this is that I understand the 365 system, and I've been arguing for it for years.
You have indeed.
And we know there's absolute commitment from the council and a budget that's there for this, so it's going to come in. And I think saying installed on the computer at this point is something we don't actually need to put on the amendment, and it's just a technical flip back to us, I think, with that on there. Is it possible just to remove that bit, because it will be in the operating system?
And Chairman, do you want me to delete the bit where it says and to include Microsoft Office 365 pre-installed? Do you want me to delete that?
I think technically we have to, Tony.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm happy to do that.
Okay. So James, have you got that?
Just about, Chairman, it's to increase the BDC 2020-2021 information technology capital budget by the amount necessary to fund. Sorry?
Necessary, yeah, necessary is fine. I said required, but necessary is fine.
Right, the amount necessary to fund the rollout of additional laptops to include the 47 elected members to better facilitate the new ways of working.
Yeah, fine. Yeah, thanks. Fine,
Okey
thanks for that. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll now put that to the vote. All those who agree, please show.
That looks to be unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you.
So that's
Could I
carried.
also say, James, it's very important, as you know, with ONS, we've been talking about this for quite some time now, that we do have the minute that robustly reflects how we came to our decision and why we came to our decision. And we did talk about in the discussion, and we did have confirmation back from officers as well, that there is funding there for this, and that the funding under COVID would cover both.
Yes,
and,
I've made note of that, Chairman.
And also, my calculations are that we are certainly only talking around about 35 to 37,000 pound anyway. So if we could reflect that in the minute, that'd be very helpful, James, as well. Thank you.
Can I
Councillor
point out,
Nurdon wishes
Chair?
to speak.
Sorry.
Sorry, can I point out, Chairman? I think you said it was recommendations 1 to 8. It was actually 1 to 10.
Sorry, you're absolutely correct. On my page, I've not flipped over. You're absolutely correct. Thanks, James. And with this iPad and everything else, you are much required, I have to say. Once you get the laptop, you won't be surplus to requirement, but you won't need to assist so much. So we have that one, which has gone to the vote. And now we're going to put 1 through to 10. Also, as part of our recommendation, all those in favour, please show.
That looks to be unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you. Now we do need to speed up on the agenda. We have actually dealt with two items because we brought one forward. But I'm looking at the time. It's 12:40, so this is probably just about the right time to have a comfort break.
Sorry, 11:40. Sorry, 11:40, Chairman. You're about
Sorry,
an hour ahead of
11:40.
yourself.
Sorry, Chairman. Councillor Nurdon wanted to speak.
Yes, Grant.
Yeah, thanks. Just quickly, on a point of the budget, we talked about the budget. That's the current budget. Normally around October time, we start looking at the budget for next tax year. When is that going to take place with regards to our budget workshops, etc.? If that can also be mentioned. Thanks.
Yeah, you're right. And at the moment, I'm in discussion with Rodney about this. We've been trying to see if we could get it arranged for October. This now is looking like November because there was a delay issue with some of the ahead budget look-ats and summaries from the directors. So I'm in discussion with Rodney about that, trying to get the first step in so that then that would make our pre-budget scrutiny more effective. So hopefully that's going to be sort of mid-November, but I do have to go through that back with Rodney. And that's why it's sort of slipped a bit till November because of the directors in terms of their stepping on where they are on their budget submissions. So, and as I actually was going to say to Rodney, when this meeting's finished, is it possible for us to tie up on the phone when the meeting's finished as well about it? Okay, is that okay, Grant?
Spot on, thanks.
Thank you. Okie dokie. So we'll just take I think it's just about right to 11:44. Take a comfort break. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. What do you prefer? 10, 5, 5, 5. Okie dokie. Right, 5
Just
minutes.
ask people to turn their video off, please.
Yeah, turn your video off, and we'll say at 11:50. Be back by 11:50. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. James, does it look like we're all back? James, does it look like we're all back?
We're still just waiting for a few members, Chairman.
Thank you.
We're just waiting for Councillor Ballman, Chairman.
Thank you. I'm actually going to start, James, and just notify me when Councillor Ballman's present.
Yes, we'll do.
Thank you. Okay, so agenda item 13, page 52, and Madeline Bussons is going to present on this. Madeline, welcome.
I am, if that's okay, Chair, sort of thing. Say,
Oh, right.
If I could just, yes. So if I may, first of all, I would like to actually introduce Madeline Bussins. Actually, she joined us in August, and she's now my senior finance business partner. So she very much drafted this report. But as it's her first overview and scrutiny committee, I thought we'd let her observe today, and actually then in future she'll be presenting reports to members. So that's why I'm taking this rather than Madeline today.
And just on that, Rodney, for again, members' information, I think that post has been outstanding for a while, isn't it?
It has indeed. It's ever since I joined, we had a contractor in, then we advertised once, and then we had to advertise a second time before we were lucky enough to secure Madeline into this role.
Well, that hopefully will relieve some of your pressure, Rodney. I know how hard and the hours you've been putting in. So, yes, hopefully that will help. Fire away, Rodney.
Yes. So very much, it's good practice to occasionally review the council's reserves. So this report very much does this. I'm not intending to go through in detail in this report, but very much I want to point out section 3, which is very much the proposals that we'd like to put forward to members, which is on page 54. So very much we're proposing that we close a number of the reserves. We're also proposing that we merge 2 reserves that are very similar purposes, namely the Economic Success Fund and the Broadland Growth Fund. And we're proposing that we actually create 2 new reserves. One for refuse services, very much to help fund the new fleet of refuse vehicles that will be needed, and also potentially to fund some improvement works to the depot. And the second reserve we're talking about creating is 4 million for new ways of working. This would obviously help cover any costs for rollout of new IT systems or potentially changes to accommodation going forward. At the moment, we haven't got firm proposals of exactly what would need the new ways of working reserve to be used for, but we're just aware that actually this is like to be coming down the line fairly soon, and therefore it's prudent to set aside money. And I wasn't going to say anything more about this report because I'm aware of the time pressures for this committee, and I'll pause there for questions.
Thank you, Rodney. Any questions, committee?
No questions?
Okay.
Councillor Ballman is back in the meeting as well,
thank you.
Chairman.
Just one quick question, Rodney. On the reserving resource implications 5.1, this is going to reduce the general fund reserves to 5.387 million. In terms of the cycle on the waste procurement, would you say this is sort of what's to be expected? And then as we move forward into a 5-year plan, this would then this would then actually reflect back up again.
Certainly, I think the ideal situation would be that actually the council sets aside some money every year to actually cover the cost of refuse replacements. Whether that's done through setting aside money every year, or whether actually the outcome of the waste procurement will be that to stagger when we purchase vehicles. So actually we buy some every year. I think that's to be seen, but certainly ideally we would continue setting aside money for refuse vehicles, as they will need to be repurchased every sort of 7 to 10 years.
Okay, and then on the purchase of those vehicles, on an external provider, just last point on this, on the external service provider for that, whether it's Veolia or whoever it is, are we then looking at leasing those vehicles back to them and receiving income from that?
This is something that will be discussed as part of the refuse procurement project that's currently ongoing. There are different models. You could actually get Veolia to buy the vehicles, or what is coming far more common is actually the local authorities to buy the vehicles and lease them on a peppercorn rent to the contractor. The reason being is that as a local authority, we have access to far cheaper borrowing than actually the private sector. So actually financially, it tends to make it better if the councils procure the vehicles themselves. And obviously we can still get the same deals as the private sector. And indeed, there are some opportunities for sort of a joining national-wide procurement for vehicles.
So irrespective, sum up on that, irrespective of whether we're purchasing the vehicles or releasing them out, or the contractor buys the vehicles, whatever way you look at it, Broadland still has to fund in whatever way that vehicle cost, because the contracts have to fund it anyway if we're not.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you on that, Rodney. There's nobody else. Just move on then. So I think we're at the stage we can move to recommendation on that. I've got page 56. You said 54, Rodney, but I've got page 56 on the recommendation, have I?
Yes, 56, going on to 57 for the recommendations.
Excuse me. Yeah, so we've got 1, 2, 3, and 4 as they are written. Could we agree to those recommendations, committee? I move.
That looks to be unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Rodney, and welcome, Madeline. Moving on to item 14, Treasury Management Quarter 2 Report 2020-21.
Again, me.
And it was going to be Darren Slover, corporate accountant, but it's you, Rodney, yeah?
Yes, okay. Yeah. Darren's on leave this weekend, so again, that is me picking up. So very much this is just the normal report we have to come back to members every 6 months under our treasury management policies, just to give you a quick update on what's going on with treasury management activities. Again, it's nothing particularly exciting this time. Very much just need to report back that actually at the end of September, we had £43 million in investments. So we're expecting our interest from our investments to be above budget. Actually, we're forecasting about £400,000 in interest on these investments over the year, which is about £160,000 more than our budget. The other point to note is very much we've had no need to borrow at all this financial year. And there's been no breaches of the council's prudential indicators, which is again a measurement of our treasury management activity. I do wish to point out that actually we have had more money with Barclays than ideally we would have liked. Ideally, we'd like to make sure that the amount of money we have with Barclays is under £10 million at all times. However, this was a deliberate policy very much in response to COVID-19. You may remember that actually at the start of the year, we were having significant money coming in for government, particularly for business rates grants. We wanted to keep this money quite short so that we can make sure that we were actually able to pay this money out as quickly as possible. But now that we're almost back to business as usual, we'll be looking to reduce the amount of money we hold with Barclays going forward. And with that, I shall pause for questions and comments.
Thank you, Rodney. Any questions?
Councillor Nurden wishes to speak.
Grant, fire away, please.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Rodney. Normally we have quite a bit of discussion about this item, but of course we are pressed for time. I was going to ask about the counterparty limit with Barclays, but you've clarified that it was 10 million and that we exceeded it by 2.5 million. So thank you for clarifying that. Paragraph 2.9. As per the agreed capital program, there was outstanding loans as of 30th of September of 330,000 to Broadland Growth Limited and 260,000 on facility agreements with 2 of the parish councils. Can you just clarify what those, well, the income from investments, of course, what is it in relation to those 2 parish councils? Is it the where they can borrow against their future SIL funds, or what is that?
Debbie, I don't know if you can help me with that one at all, because I don't have that information to hand. I may need to come back to you on this one.
I believe it is the borrowing against the SIL funds, but I believe, Rodney, perhaps it would be best if you came back to members and just clarified that.
Yeah, the reason why I was asking is because we have an agenda item much later in the papers to do with the community grants, and it was something that was mentioned that is another source of community grant funding. So I just wanted to clarify that early in the meeting.
Unfortunately, I will have to come back to you on that one.
Thank you, Grant. Anyone else? Okie dokie.
Councillor Holland wishes to speak, Chairman.
Thank you. Sue, far away.
Yeah, I was just curious about the no borrowing until 2022, when we've suddenly got borrowing in a year of, I think, 5 million. Is there a reason for that? I may have missed something, but I apologise if I have.
This is very much linked to potential investment through our company Broadland Growth. So obviously, if they have desires to expand the work of Broadland Growth, we may well wish to actually invest through our company.
Yeah, just being on this point from Sue. I mean, it's got that figure in there of 5 million. So, has Debbie or yourself got any more to add to that in terms of thoughts about why that sort of figure's there and what that possible investment could be?
Do you want me to take that, Rodney? When we were pulling together the capital programme, there was a potential for the council, because of the of its reserves and everything, to potentially invest some more money in Broadland Growth, obviously depending upon the schemes they want to take forward. In terms of that, so in terms of the return that the council would get, obviously it would be looking to lend at around 4%. So would have that interest coming back into the council, but alongside that would also be developing residential homes, which themselves would deliver things like council tax and obviously good standard housing for the residents of Broadland. My understanding is that the company at the moment has obviously just finished its latest scheme and is now looking at what other schemes it can develop going forward. So isn't it in the position quite at the moment to request or borrow any money, but obviously it's there if they should wish to do so, and obviously come forward with a scheme that the council wants to help them with.
Okay, and I think the point that Sue is making is really, and you've answered it, is this actually an issue in terms of a liability around debt, or is this actually an investment source to generate incomes, etc.? And I think you've adequately explained that, Debbie. It's actually the latter rather than the former. Okie dokie. You okay with that, Sue?
Yes, thank you, Chair. That did clear that up for me. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? No. Okay, right, move on to the recommendations then on page 63. We've got Cabinet is recommended to request the council, and we have A and B there. Can we recommend that? I'll move that. Please show hands.
Yes, that looks to be unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Now, agenda item 15, strategic performance and finance reports for quarters, page 66. So I'm going to preempt you here. I had Madeline busting down, but I guess it's you again, Rodney.
I think Sinead is going to be leading on this one to start with.
Right, okay. Sinead. And then is Mel Taylor also going to present?
So, Chairman, I'm going to introduce the item, and then Sinead is going to cover the performance element. And then, as it is Rodney's show today, Rodney will also cover the finance elements of the report as well.
Okay. Right, fire away then. Thank you, Sinead.
Thank you. So in terms of the report in front of you, so this is the first new look Q1 and Q2 performance and finance report for Broadland Council. It's the first report that covers the new delivery measures that were outlined in the delivery plan for 2020-21, which was agreed by Cabinet and councils to outline the programme of work for the council for the year. So we're reporting against those new measures in the delivery plan and have developed the format of the report to give a more comprehensive view of progress to date and how that fits in the wider picture. Rodney will also cover the finance update as part of the report. Future reports, so in Q3, will also cover the risk for the council. So this is following the adoption of the risk policy by Cabinet. We took a draft of the draft risk register into the recent audit committee and had really helpful comments from that. We're bringing it back into audit committee in November, and then we'll be bringing the updated risk register as part of future quarter reporting. So the next update you will have on that is in Q3. Now I'm going to hand over to Sinead, who's going to talk you through some of the key highlights from the performance side of the report.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Chair. So as Hannah said, I'm going to talk you through the performance element of the report, and then I'll hand over to Rodney to talk through finance. We've also got a number of directors and assistant directors in the virtual room today. So if you've got any questions on the detail, I'm sure they'll be able to answer your questions. So in terms of the report itself, it provides an overview of the performance of the council for the last 2 quarters. And it's aligned to, as Hannah said, the performance measures that were set out in the delivery plan agreed by Cabinet in March this year. And as you can see, the format of the report has been updated to reflect the change in performance measures and also to provide some more contextual information to explain those delivery measures. As the report explains, some of the measures have been given targets for year-end success. And those that have been given targets were provided a RAG status, so red, amber, green, to show the progress that we're making. All in all, a large proportion of those measures that we have currently are either being baseline this year or have year-end targets, which we'll report on as part of the Q4 reports. For those that we do have targets for, 7 are currently shown as green, and that means that they are on target to meet the year-end success measure. And 4 of those are currently showing as being red, so not on target for this particular quarter. So just to draw your attention to some of the performance highlights in the report. So over the last 2 quarters, we've secured a significant amount of external funding, coming to over £5 million, which is a real great success for Broadland. Over 2.7 million of this is for the Getting Building Fund to support the delivery of the Food Innovation Centre. And the remaining is from the MHCRG for the Next Steps accommodation programme. And then there's around 428,000 for the COVID economic recovery initiatives. Alongside this, over the last 2 quarters, Broadland supported over 2,100 residents through our discretionary prevention services. As you can see, the figure for Q2 has gone down significantly, and this is thought to be due to the level of the complexity of the cases increasing as the impacts of COVID becomes clearer. And as we move into the next quarter, work continues in that team to plan for second wave scenarios. In terms of environmental measures, As you can see in Q1, the percentage of household waste recycled has increased, and it shows nearly a 3% increase in the recycling rate compared to this time last year. The national recycling rate is currently sitting at 44.7%, and Broadland is performing at around 52.5%. And this shows that the councils consistently has a higher recycling rate compared to average. Just to draw your attention to a couple of areas that we've highlighted for improvement. So as for the missed bins, as you can see, in Q1, we were on target to deliver against our year-end success rate of no more than 30 missed bins per 100,000. As you can see in Q2, this has increased over our success rate and is currently sitting at 40. It's mainly thought this is due to a mixture of sickness and annual leave issues from our contractor, but work has been underway with the contractor to train crews to understand different routes, so they understand those routes when they're covering. And we're also going to be including this as a performance measure for the contractor in the future. Second thing to draw your attention to is the percentage of successful interventions to prevent or relieve homelessness. So as you can see in the report, we've seen a drop in performance over the last quarter, with our success rate of being 80% of successful interventions, and the council's currently performing at around 62%. The main reason for this is that the team have experienced over twice the usual number of people being in our temporary accommodation as a result of the impact of the pandemic, and this has affected the team resource. And as you'll know, the team is currently progressing a housing best-in-class project, which is really going to ensure we're providing the best housing services to our residents. And finally, just to draw your attention to strategic risks. So as Hannah said, the risk management policy was agreed by Cabinet in August. Work's been underway to develop what that process looks like for developing and monitoring all types of risks to the organisation. The draft risk register has now been through audit committee, and we're now working on the feedback and the changes to that strategic risk register, and aim to bring it back as part of the Q3 reports for ONS and Cabinet to review. I will pause there and see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Sinead. Any questions? Sue Holland.
Yes, hello. It's on page 77. This probably, I'm sure this will explain itself really, but on page 7 there's a pie chart of the different colours, which is quite difficult to see on a black and white printout. But also, I wasn't quite clear as to which items were in red, which were in green, and so on. Is it possible to have any other labels on there so that we can be clear what they relate to? I'm sure I could pick it out of a chart somewhere, or it's in another pie chart, but I felt that pie chart wasn't particularly clear, and I wonder whether that could be resolved. Does that make sense?
Yes, Hannah?
So in terms of the pie chart, I think within your members area on your devices, the colour version of the report should be there for you to view. I think the reason that the papers are printed in black and white is because of the cost reason. As you can imagine, the amount of papers that have gone out to cover this meeting today. But we can absolutely take the point around labels to make it clearer on those black and white copies.
Thank you. And just pick up on this point, Sue, as you know, memory like an elephant, we did actually raise this at the previous meeting, and I think Sue Pruton actually raised the point at previous meeting, if I'm correct, Sue, about labels, because we understand the cost, and obviously, printing black and white, but then just the labels go on, then mean that we can easily identify what's going on. So the second time we've raised it, so that'd be much appreciated if you could. Wonderful. Any other points? Grant? I'm lucky, I've just got 9 on exactly where I'm looking.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I was looking through. I've just got a few queries relating to this officer's report. Item 3.3, where it talks about resources, 1.4 million, including 1.3 million unspent COVID-19 funding. Just curious to know how we intend to spend that 1.3 million unspent COVID funding, which I presume is coming from from the government and not coming from our budget. Is, for example, concern about, we have this issue about child vouchers for free school meals, or we have issues to do with food banks or supporting vulnerable families. So that was to do with 3.3. I look at then 3.9, and we have a budget to date on the Warm Homes Fund of 60,000. We have a budget to date of 60,000, but we have spent 290,000, and it says here that external funding will be claimed to cover all expenditure. Is this going to come from that maybe 1.3 million unspent funds? Is that going to come from government? Where is that additional expenditure going to come from? Or, when we claim that, is it going to be from our funds or their funds or some other funds? So that's question on 3.9. And then I go on to 3.22, where we talk about staff absence levels. And I know that we are looking at this issue of staff retention as a time and task panel. However, the last sentence had me a little bit curious. It says here, the staff retention level is currently 97.5%. And this is thought to be high due to the current employment market. So what I'm curious to know is that just for the month of October that you've managed to retain 97.5% of the staff that you had at the beginning of October? Or is this 97.5% of staff that you had at the beginning of the financial year, in other words, at the start of Q1? So if I can just get a bit of clarity on that. So those are my three questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. Who wants to come back to Grant?
Shall I come on the first two? So just regarding to the unspent COVID-19 money, some of that is just a time delay. We're actually with incurred expenditure, but haven't actually sort of charged for that. But other of it is, as referred to earlier in the report, we've just agreed potentially another £115,000 for laptops, potentially member laptops as well will come out of that. Increased expenditure for the regulatory service, again, that's coming out of that. So actually there are plans in foot to actually spend this money. It's just a timing issue. With at the end of September, we had more money in than we'd spent, but I'm sure by the end of the year, with the demands coming from COVID-19, we will have spent all that money.
Sorry, Rodney, just to go on with that, so that money, that new money, £49,000, is that included in the 1.4 million, or is that now new money that's been allocated for, because you're talking about enforcement?
That's on top of that. The COVID funding is actually quite complicated. There's probably about 15 different schemes in total where we've got different funding money. What we're reporting there is the money that's been unallocated, that's been allocated to us to spend on anything we need relating to COVID, as opposed to specific grants for the enforcement activity or for business grants. So this is the money we have control over what is spent on.
Okay.
I had another question as well about that Warms Home funding.
Yeah.
So this is very much our capital programme. So the Warms Home Fund, as I understand it, is a multi-year project, and therefore it's a timing issue. Overall, the overall scheme will be covered fully by grants coming in to cover that. It's just that actually our phasing of the expenditure wasn't quite correct when we set it in the budgets, but actually any money we spend under this will be covered from these government grants. And the third issue was about the staffing issue, which I think I need to refer back to Sinead or Hannah.
Okay, Sinead, just for Hannah, just before we come back in, I've picked up on my limited screen here, Sue Holland and Caroline. I've got you. So once we clear this on this third item, I'll come on to you. Is it Hannah or Sinead's going to?
Yeah, happy to come in on this one, Chairman. So in terms of the, I think the question was around the 97.5% retention, what that related to. So that is the figure for Q2. So that is the retention of staff during that quarter. Within the report, there's also the data for Q1, where the retention was ever so slightly higher at 98.1%. In terms of the point raised about the economic climate, obviously we know nationally and regionally there is a more uncertain job climate out there, and so that is why we would expect the retention rates to be a little higher at this particular time.
Thank you. Okie doke. So Sue Holland was in first, then you, Caroline.
Yeah, sorry, this does relate to staff again as well. Again, I'm sorry, it's a pie chart. It's not the colour this time, I would hasten to add. There are percentages on some of these pie charts for an overview of some of the results from the recent staff survey. What I would be interested in, and I may have missed it again, if I have, I'm sorry, but do we know how many members of staff actually responded to the survey and what percentage of our staff members that is? So that's my first question. And my second question relates actually not to staff. So if you'd rather ask that later, I will, but that's to do with the vulnerable residents who are supported by the discretionary preventions. So would you like me to ask that one as well?
I think for time, do it, and then we can have a chance
okay.
back. Thanks.
Well, we have in all of these graphs that we've been given for all of these elements, we have progress BDC listed. But on our year-end success of 2,000 residents is a combined figure for Broadland District Council and South Norfolk Council. And I wondered whether Broadland Council's own figures were available or not. I'm guessing not, as they haven't been given them separately, but it just seemed odd that everything else related to Broadland and this particular item had a joint figure.
Okay, and just pick up on this point again, memory like an elephant. I remember the last time we went through this, the same point was made then, Sue, as well, about the 2,000 figure. So yeah, who would like to cover those 2 points, Hannah or Sinead? Hannah?
Chairman. So in terms of the staff survey, so I think it's around 60% of staff that responded to the staff survey. It was done towards the start of the year, so it's a good few months moved on since it was taken, but around 6% of staff at the start of the year. In terms of the figures around those helped, the figure that is outlined in the report about the numbers of support delivered is a Broadland figure. The 2,000 was a combined target that was put into the delivery plan, but the figure that you've got in front of you about the support that has been provided is a Broadland specific figure.
May I come back on that, Chair?
Yeah, sorry.
This is kind of the staff survey. I just feel that it's a little bit misleading to say below provides an overview of some of the results from the most recent staff survey when we're talking about Q1, Q2, and this survey you're saying was done some time ago. I think particularly given the problems that have been experienced by people and the COVID situation, it might be useful perhaps to note when you put a survey results in when that survey was done. It helps to give some understanding of where we were at the time and where we might be now, if that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, could you pick that up for us? That'd be very much appreciated. Thanks, Hannah. Caroline?
Thanks, Steve. I was just a bit worried about the drop in the amount spent on disabled facilities grants. Now, is this because there's a drop in applications, or are you having the same amount of applications you normally have per year, but the work is not being done because of COVID?
Again, who wants to pick this up?
Jamie Sutterby.
I can see Kevin's on the call too, Chair, and may want to, but for expediency, the answer is it's been about the supply chain and its effect. It's how it's been affected through COVID. The demand is still there. The team are working hard to make sure that the money we've been allocated is distributed and spent on residents who have need. We're also in conversation with the powers that be through the Better Care Fund to see if there's any ability to transfer the funding over into the next financial year to ensure that it can be used for the impact for which it is intended.
Okay, I'm just concerned about people who in desperate need of adaptations to their home. They're not getting it.
Understood, Councillor. It's just about the supply chain, and it's not something we have direct control over. Kevin, is there anything you wanted to add?
I would say that we'd all through COVID, while we have applications coming in, and while we were unable to deliver the service because we just weren't allowed in the people's home, and nor were the actual contractors that provide the adaptations, we catalogued every.
Okay, thank you.
The process itself, there is a prioritisation procedure to make sure that those who are in most desperate need will actually be given top priority as service, as it is doing now, is actually coming back into delivery.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, Caroline. Anyone else?
Chairman, I believe Sue Catchpole had some questions.
Okay, Sue, far away, please.
Thank you, Chair. Page 69, it says under non-paid budgets 3.7 that there's a favourable variance of 3.3 million, predominantly down to a reduction in payments for housing benefit of 1.9 million. I just wondered if that could be explained. Why has there been a reduction in housing benefit payments? Sorry, I've got several points to make. On page 70, at the top, it says the budget for Thorpe Lodge refurbishment. The project's on hold while options are being considered. I wondered what those options are and whether members will have an opportunity to discuss those. On page 72, growing the economy, it says that it's anticipated that arrears levels will be higher at the end of this year, and I wondered what sort of percentage is being projected as of business ratepayers being in arrears, because I think that could be quite significant. And on Grant's point of the 1.3 million outstanding unspent COVID funding, I wrote a note saying, what are we waiting for? But also I haven't really heard much about what do our residents need. So I'm wondering who's looking at that and coming up with what is it that the money that isn't going to be allocated for operational expenditure, what might get to our residents and in how, under what initiatives. Then in Appendix 2, on page 88, I felt quite strongly about this. The collection rate of council tax, it says, however, we are hopeful that we will be able to resume court work over the autumn and winter in order to collect council tax. I really did not like reading that, and I'm sure our residents wouldn't either. Are we really hopeful that we can resume court work? I'm sorry, I really think that given the protocol that we have in place for the collection of council tax, that the approach to the collection of council tax should by now, with that protocol in place, have been softened, and the attitudes to it should be softened so that we are encouraging our residents to pay their council tax and helping them to deal with any financial issues they may have that's getting in the way of them being able to pay their council tax. I think that was all on this section. Thank you, Chair.
Well, I think you raised 6 points there. I might have had, it might have been 5, but I think it was 6. So I don't know, Rodney, Sinead, Hannah, how you want to try to, or actually Jamie as well, I think, how you want to try to cover these between you.
Shall we take these in turns? Well, I think the first one was me for the housing benefit expenditure, wasn't it? This is one that actually I think we, like many councils, struggle to actually get an accurate estimate for what a housing benefit is going to be, because this is very, very much demand led. We need to put this variance of 1.9 million in the context of we do spend over £20 million on housing benefit. So actually we set the budget at the start of the year expecting what the housing benefit demand will be, and at the moment it's slightly lower, probably about 10% under our budget figure. So although 1.9 million is a large number, in percent wise it's actually quite a small portion of the overall sort of figure. I'd just like to reassure you that obviously if people are entitled to the housing benefit, they will get it. We're not rationing it if they're entitled to it. If we need to spend 24 million, we'll spend 24 million, and that money will be recovered from government. So I think that was the first question. The second one was about Thorpe Lodge refurbishment. Was that you, Hannah, to pick that one up?
I'm happy to come in on this point. So this was part of the update that we gave to SIC around new ways of working and looking at the variety of different projects that fall within that one, looking at what the options could potentially be around office and support customer offer. So absolutely, Councillor Catchpole, this is something that would come forward to members for consideration and decision with options presented, but still in its very, very early days and not at this point ready for to be brought forward. But when that work has been scoped out, absolutely will come forward to members for decision.
Thank you. And the other points? Not sure.
Right, could I just come back on that just to say that does sound like we will be asked to consider and not consulted with. I would make that point as a member. I would prefer to be consulted rather than being given the opportunity to consider. Thank you.
Sorry, who else is going to cover the points?
I think the next one was around business rates projections. I don't know, Rodney, do you want to come in on that one?
Sorry, can you just repeat that question?
Yeah, of course. It was on page 72, growing the economy. It says the arrears levels for business rates will be higher at the end of the year. I just wondered what your projections are for how much higher are they likely to be in arrears for business rates?
This is quite difficult because obviously a lot of businesses are only just starting up and it depends the effect of a second wave. So we're hoping that we'll be collected as much as possible, but it could be 3, 4, 5% lower than we'd ideally like. But to be honest, it'll only be closer to the end of the year when we actually know that true position. But obviously we're discussing with them, anyone who's having trouble paying, we'll try and make sure we've got the arrangements, if necessary, spreading that repayment term longer than the end of the year. But at the moment, I'd say the worst case scenario is probably 5% down on where we'd like to be.
Okay, Derek. And the final point.
The next one was about the COVID, what we're going to be spending the money on and the needs of the residents.
Yeah.
I think I'd draw members' attention to the recovery plan we put in place about our COVID actions. I think that went through the last committee cycle, yeah, and I'm very much saying this is what our plan is to support the residents, and obviously we will do whatever we can sort of with one resident at a time, with one business at a time, to actually help people through this pandemic and moving forward. I also had the comment, I think, on my section about the court and recovery actions for council tax. Apologise if the phrasing didn't come off as it should do, because obviously you're absolutely right. If people contact us, we will discuss with them circumstances and actually do whatever we can to actually make sure the payments are sort of affordable, and actually we will, if necessary, refer them to be able to claim any benefits they're entitled to. Where we do want to take people to court is actually where they do not engage with us at all. If actually they do not correspond with us, they do not respond to any of our letters or reminders, then ultimately we need that ability to go to the court to actually force people to actually engage. Unfortunately, they have got a liability to pay this council tax. We can only help them if they contact us. And in the last instance, we will need to take that court action in order to actually force them to actually come to the table and discuss their council tax debt.
Thanks, Rodney. So you're saying that's the last resort?
It is. We would much prefer people, if they're having trouble paying their council tax bill, to call up, speak to one of our officers, or email us, contact us in whichever manner they feel most appropriate to themselves, and we will treat their cases sympathetically and do what we can to support them through this crisis. But if people don't engage, then yes, we do have that ability to take people to court to actually force them to actually start discussing their council tax bills. And in many ways, this is part of the process of helping people. There are quite a few people in the community that actually have got into significant financial debt, and actually we can help them, refer them to actually debt counselling services, other abilities to actually help them sort their financial problems out.
Right, thank you. Rodney.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we have been through this a number of times about that being a last resort. I won't mention the council or councils, but we know that some councils automatically flag up, here's your notice, and here's notice of court action as well. But Broadland has not taken that approach, and our figures are quite low, Rodney, aren't they, in terms of outstanding council tax that's owed. It's quite low as a council. I think we're one of the lowest in the country, actually.
Yes, we do have a very good collection rate for our council tax.
Very low. And I think, Sue, that covered all the points.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okie dokie. Right, anyone else? Grant.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. It's just in relation to 3.15 to do with the business rates. I'm a little bit puzzled to understand the under collection of business rates with regards to those businesses that get small business rates relief were given a grant of £10,000, and there was a £25,000 payment also to, I think it was to do with the retail, hospitality and leisure businesses. So my understanding was that those are the businesses, because they received those payments, that we wouldn't have any issues to do with the under collection of business rates. So what I would be interested to know is that under collection of business rates relates to non-retail, hospitality and leisure businesses, as well as those businesses, of course, that have small business rates relief anyway.
Okay. Who's covering that?
I think, again, I just need to cover that. In a normal year, the council would collect about £30 million worth of business rates income. With additional grants, we've actually reduced council tax, business rates bills by about £10 million. So actually, we're only looking to collect about £20 million from our businesses. The other £10 million being covered by that grant the government is actually paying to ourselves. So what we're then looking at is our collection, or percentage collection of that remaining £20 million, if that helps.
Okay with that, Grant?
Yeah, that.
Okie dokie. Anyone else? Right, in that case, I'll move to the recommendations, and we have two on this. We have one, note the revenue and capital position variance details appendix 1, and 2, 2020-21 performance quarter 1, quarter 2 detailed appendix. Could we agree those recommendations, please? I'll move.
Again, that looks to be unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you. Moving on to item 16, and just giving you a time check here, it's 12:40 committee. So a reminder there. We are actually catching up, but just a reminder there. So item 16, approval of UK Municipal Bond Agency Framework Agreement. This is pretty much as it's written, actually. And Debbie Lorimer, you're going to amplify on this, page 110 through to page 118.
Thank you, Chair. when we presented the Treasury Management Strategy back in February, part of that also included that officers would come back and present a report on the Municipal Bonds Agency. This is just a potential borrowing source, but to borrow from them you have to sign up to their framework. Until you actually borrow, there is no liability, so us purely signing up to that framework means that we're starting the process, and then if ever we need to borrow in future and they offer rates that are attractive, then we can use them as a borrowing source. The only thing to really note for members is that there is a proportional and several guarantee, which means if anybody or one of the borrowers should default, and these would be local authorities who are borrowing from them, then as a borrower from them, once we have a loan, then we would potentially be liable for a percentage of that default. But nobody has ever defaulted to date in all the history, going right back many centuries. So the risk is fairly low. And that's all I really want to say, is that this is just asking Cabinet to note and recommend to full council that we sign this framework to enable us to use as a source of borrowing if ever we need to in the future. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions for Debbie on this? I'm taking that as a no. It's pretty straightforward. This one is a framework.
Councillor Nurden, sorry, Chairman is indicating.
Grant, fire away, Grant.
Sorry, yeah, I just this is nothing like the setup that we had where we were going to join a mutual insurance thing or something like that. I just noted that the agency has two classes of shares in issue. Would we become a shareholder? And I noticed that in our area, Norwich City Council, South Norfolk District Council, and Ipswich Borough Council are shareholders. So by signing up, do we become a shareholder, or is it only when we take out a loan from this organisation that we become a shareholder?
It is totally separate to the insurance mutual that we were looking at previously. No, you don't become a shareholder even if you take borrowing from them. Some time ago, when the Municipal Bonds Agency was being set up, there was a call for whether local authorities would like to become shareholders at that time. And at that time, South Norfolk did invest, as did a number of authorities. But becoming a shareholder has nothing to do in terms of taking borrowing or anything like that, and you don't automatically become a shareholder if you do borrow from them. That's entirely separate.
Okay, Grant. So with that clarification, I'd like to move the recommendation, which is sorry. Could you just give me one moment, please?
I think it's the builders again, everybody.
Yes, could you hear that? I couldn't hear myself at all. Sorry about that. Right. Let's get back now to where I was. So yeah, we've got the recommendation on page 17 to approve the council's entry into the framework agreement and its accompanying schedules. I so move. All agree? Sorry. Yes. Show of hands, please. Or fingers.
Looks to be unanimous, Chairman.
It does, Chairman, yeah.
Thank you. Right, item 17, vision for best-in-class housing offer and draft allocation schemes, page 121. And I understand that Richard Dunshaw is going to present on this. Also, Victoria Parsons is in support. So Richard, would you like to fire away, please, and welcome to the meeting.
Thank you very much, Chair. The presentation part is going to be done by Victoria. I'll be fielding any questions following it, so I'll pass over to Victoria if that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Jamie, I think you'd indicated that you wanted to say something at the beginning. Is that still the case, or would you like me to go ahead? We've still got Jamie with us.
I think Jamie's had to leave to go to a TCG COVID meeting, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Go
Thanks,
ahead,
Debbie.
Victoria.
In that case, I'll make a start. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Chair. So this is presenting to you the findings of the Housing Service Review work, which has been taking place since February. The report before you also covers the proposed overall direction for the Housing Service, which we're asking members to note and endorse at present. We are taking forward the draft allocation scheme, as this is very much in need of updating. So this is being brought forward to Cabinet for the recommendation to Council to adopt the scheme. It's also been presented to Wellbeing Panel, who have agreed to endorse the best-in-class housing offer and the allocation scheme. It's quite a long report, so I don't know if it would be preferable to the Chair if we go through individual sections of the report and then sort of pause at different stages for questions.
Yeah, I don't think we've got. We're short on time, but I don't think we've got any options actually around this, because otherwise it all gets very complicated for you and us as well. So yeah, if you could do that, please, that'd be much appreciated.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So initially the project was predicated on a new approach for the housing service, drawing on a nationally informed viewpoint for new and innovative practice and building on the Greater Norwich homelessness strategy. We also wanted to update the allocation scheme and design a service that was clear and transparent for the team and for our residents. And we're doing this with consultants funded by the LGA, Campbell Tickell, and a joint member working group. The outbreak of COVID-19 pretty much coincided with the early stages of the project, but that meant we were in a good position to design something to enable the council to meet the challenge, particularly around the increase in demand we're going to see as the economic impact deepens. So in terms of the report findings, the consultant noted that the council has good outcomes in terms of preventing and relieving homelessness. However, this is mainly facilitated through the social housing sector, which in a continued COVID-19 landscape isn't going to be as sustainable or as preventative as we would like. So as a result, a best-in-class housing offer has been developed, including a comprehensive accommodation pathway model over 4 stages. And full details can be found in the report by Campbell Tickell at Appendix A. However, what it does is it sets out how residents and the council can resolve housing need at various stages, right from the beginning in encouraging residents to access self-service advice and think about future options. So for example, a young person considering leaving home, right through to ensuring that those with more complex needs can receive extra help to resolve homelessness and to keep that support going for a little while to prevent housing crisis in the future. And key to this model is the allocation scheme. And this is what we're seeking approval to implement from April 2021. An updated scheme is necessary to ensure the council can deliver the most effective housing service in relation to the housing list and social housing, and is also legally compliant. So within the scheme, there's a few aspects I'd like to touch on, and these are detailed on page 137 of your papers. And the first is the process by which social housing is allocated. So we are proposing a hybrid scheme in which the majority of applicants can exercise choice by indicating which of the available properties they would like to live in. And this would be facilitated through a weekly bidding process through an online system. For households who have additional needs, or for those who are unable to access the internet, we can facilitate this through processes such as assisted bidding and alternative communication methods. And this means applicants have a more active role in looking for a new home. It also means they know what is available and in what location, and where they are more likely to be successful in their bid. We will also offer a system of direct lets for specific properties. For example, where there is an urgent rehousing requirement for an applicant, or where we have a property available with very specific adaptations. And we're also proposing to implement a nominations process where more than 5 new build properties are becoming available on a development. Applicants will be able to bid for that development and they will be matched to a suitable property available. And this means that the applicant has still been able to make a choice in the area in which they want to live, but the council is able to best manage the letting of the new properties coming through and ensuring that those in the most need have access to them. So with the public consultation we've just undertaken, just under 85% of respondents in the Broadland area were in favour of this approach. I think now is probably a good time to pause and see if there are any questions.
Thank you. Yes, any questions, committee? No?
No.
Okie dokie. Right, if you'd like to move on, please, to the next section.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of how we give priority to those on the housing list, we're proposing to have a 4-banded system. And this is instead of the 3-banded system we have currently. And this means we can introduce an urgent band, meaning that those in very high housing need or in temporary accommodation are better placed to be rehoused. So the diagram at 5.32 of the report gives an indication of the structure of the bands given the current housing list. And if you compare it to the existing structure at 3.1, you can see the difference it makes for the really urgent cases in terms of their placing on the list. And again, it also provides the transparency for households in understanding their position on the list. We're also proposing, where there have been previous issues with households in terms of antisocial behaviour or rent arrears, a process of suspended bidding. So previously applicants would have been placed in a reduced preference band. However, now they would be given their banding as per their priority, but they will not be able to bid until they've undertaken a period of stabilisation work with us. And this means working with us and other organisations to reduce rent arrears or address their behaviour. Once the agreed outcome has been achieved, the suspension will be removed. And in this way, the applicant is working with the council to resolve issues and ensure that their future tenancy is sustainable. To caveat this though, we would say that we will look at each household's circumstances before implementing this approach so that we avoid increasing any risk or vulnerability for an applicant. And again, going back to our consultation, 74% of Broadland respondents have indicated that they are in favour of this approach. Would now be another time to pause for questions?
Yes, I think it would. Any questions? No, Caroline.
I'm just being a bit pernickety. You say 74% out of how many people responded?
For residents in the Broadland area, it was 75 responses. So it was
75?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So 50. Well, yeah. Did I see your hand up, Sue Holland, or is that just a glitch on your screen? Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Okie dokie. Right, so move on to the next section, Victoria.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so in terms of accessing the housing list, we are proposing a single point of access across Broadland and South Norfolk, because this would be through one single IT system, which gives a consistent approach for the housing team. When bidding for properties, applicants can see what is available across both districts and can place bids on those properties. However, properties would be allocated firstly to those in the district the property is located, and then as per priority need and time on the housing list. If at the point that property isn't let, it will be offered to applicants in the other district. And again, this would be allocated in order of priority need. So for example, if we have a property that is available in Broadland, it will be available to Broadland residents. If it isn't let to any of the applicants in the priority bandings 1 to 4, it will be offered to South Norfolk residents. And again, it would follow the highest priority banding. And with this approach, it means we steer away from having any empty properties that would make a home for someone. It reduces the risk of antisocial behaviour and provides a bit of mobility for residents between the two districts. And again, looking at consultation responses, 80% of Broadland respondents were in approval of this approach. Any questions?
Yes. Just in relation to the, so I've picked up the point you're making around, you've got the 4 levels of banding. Gets offered to, for instance, in Broadland residents first, then it would move around. If that was the case. No, I'm sorry. I've just seen it. Actually, it's covered. I've just seen it. It is covered. The point I was going to raise, so I won't waste your time. Thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else? Okay. Right. If you'd like to move on again, Victoria.
Thanks. This is the final section. So I've referred during the report to the public consultation. So this was a period of public and stakeholder consultation we undertook following the wellbeing panel, and which ended last Friday. So we haven't been able to undertake a really in-depth analysis, but a headline analysis shows we had 184 respondents overall. As I said, 75 of those respondents were from Broadland. We also had 7 responses from different organisations as well. An average of 81% of Broadland respondees were in favour of the proposals contained within the scheme, the allocation scheme. And where respondents left comments, outline themes on the comments include, so it's about ensuring that any online self-service is in addition to current contact methods, ensuring the scheme can meet the needs of people with a disability. And then we also had specific comments on banding and qualification criteria. So we are going to take a further in-depth analysis, and those results will be incorporated into the council report and also the equality impact assessment. So I just want to summarise now. So we have a proposed direction that we're seeking to take, which has a number of separate but interdependent projects, both within the service and corporately. And these are to be worked up into detailed project plans to be taken forward. But the cornerstone of this is the allocation scheme, which is about putting Broadland in the best position possible in this COVID landscape and beyond by giving staff clarity and efficiency in their approach. But also vitally, it's for people who are living or seeking to live in the district, enabling them to manage their housing need. It's about creating sustainability, giving people the tools to manage their housing need themselves and supporting those who are more vulnerable. Thank you.
Okay, and I'll just come back on one point of clarification, actually, because what I was going to ask, I can see now is covered, but it has led me then on to the next point, actually. So just practically, just a practical example here. We've got 4 tiers. We then have we've exhausted that. Then we have somebody from South Norfolk who is offered a place. If the person in South Norfolk was to say, I've been offered this place, however, in terms of my work, in terms of what I'm doing, could be part-time, whatever, and my family, kids in school, whatever, Broadland, you know, it's just a bit too far away where this house is. Does that person then go down back basically to the bottom of the list or come out of the criteria? Yeah.
So shall I jump in here and answer that question? So the first thing is that people have to actively bid on the property. So yes, through assisted bidding, we may put that bid on for that person. However, before doing an assisted bid, we would be asking them what kind of areas they would want to live in before we put those bids on for that person. So the person in question here would have had to have chosen to bid on that property.
Sure.
So the likelihood of them choosing to bid on a place in which they didn't really want to live is slim. However, it can happen out of desperation. If they then choose not to go for that property, it does have to have a reasonable reason why they don't want to go for that property. However, being 40 miles away from their, or however many miles away from their work would be considered a reasonable reason for them not to accept that property. And then following that, we would advise them to possibly use their bids a bit more smartly moving forwards to avoid anyone wasting their time. Okay. But no, they certainly would not go. It's not a case of, well, you're band 1, you can go to band 4 because you've wasted our time. No chance. We work just on the needs of the person.
Thank you for that. Because you can imagine in some other authority that could be an arbitrary, blind kind of approach. Mm-hmm. So appreciate that. Anyone else before we move to recommendation?
Sue Cratchpole has a question, Chairman.
Fire away, please, Sue.
Thank you, Chair. I'm hoping that we are covering the allocations section as well, because that's where my question is. That's page 271.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good. It says under household splits that unless there's a residence order, then if the children are mainly with one parent after a split, that only that parent can apply. And that worries me a lot, because there's a big push by CAFCAS and other agencies to get couples to make a written agreement, a parenting plan, rather than push through the courts, which would be the way of getting a residence order. So on page 279, you have under child residency, a bedroom will be allocated for a child residing as part of the household 4 nights per week or more. I do think that in the spirit of the way things are moving, to try to encourage both parents to play an active role in the child's life, that if a household splits and, let's say, as a consequence, loses their home, then I would say if a child resides as part of a household 4 nights per fortnight or more, because depending on the agreement, the parenting plan that the couple have agreed will determine how many nights the children spend in each household, but both parents will need somewhere for those children to stay.
So do you mind me answering that? Is that, sorry?
Absolutely.
It's an incredibly difficult situation. So reallocations policy, in a nutshell, is there to try and balance the demands on the housing system and making sure that those who need it most obtain it. So one of the highly sought after property is a 3-bedroom property, for example. So we can only really house the children in question in this situation once, and it's a very, very difficult situation to try and resolve. What we normally do is two bedroom upper floor flats are entitled to the single resident. So if you are single male, unfortunately go down that route that normally happens here, you have a family breakdown, then you have both partners come in, both are eligible to go on the housing register. It's not that they're not eligible, it's just that they're not eligible for covering of both eligible to house those children individually. So what would normally happen in that situation is the lady who is normally taking full parental control, and therefore the test is often who's getting a child benefit, where do the children live a majority of the time, where is their education closest to, those kind of elements. We look at it as a holistic assessment, right? Well, the majority of the time they are with that individual applicant. Therefore, that person will be eligible for that 3-bedroom house. The other person is eligible for a 1-bed ground floor or a 2-bed upper floor. That gives that person the flexibility to have a spare bedroom whereby they can live in that, where the children can come and stay. Now, as we move more and more towards a 50-50 split, these rules are getting much more difficult to allow the housing service to work for it. So what we often do is work within housing benefit regulations, because what we don't want to do is put that person, that single occupant, in a house, in a 3-bedroom house, then they get bedroom tax and then they can't afford their house. So because the housing benefit regulations and universal credit regulations mean that they do not have access to a 3-bedroom property, so we do not want to set them up to fail. Now, this is an issue which is a developing issue and is by far from a simple solution to be able to quickly answer. And then you throw into the mix the fact that a large majority of our register are after or seeking a 3-bedroom property, and there is not enough to go around. And the last thing we need to do is have a property which is a 3-bedroom property where someone is living in, where a majority of the time that the other bedrooms aren't being utilised.
Okay. Right. So.
Sorry, can I just come back, because I think in that case we need under the what's it called at the end, the Equalities and Communities Impact Assessment, that if it's the case that a disproportionate number of women do house their child for the 4 nights or more, then there is an impact on male fathers.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, in a situation of a relationship breakdown. Yes, you are right, and we need to detail it in there. Yeah.
Noted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And all that is doing is actually reflecting where you currently are, isn't it, Richard?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's exactly the same situation now, and it's the same challenge that nationally all housing departments face. This quandary of how best to deal with this situation.
Yeah. So we're not actually just adopted something different. Could I just make a reminder? It's just gone 12 now. Before we get to the recommendations, sorry, one. Before we get to the bunch from you. Before we get to recommendations, is there any other questions from anybody else? Nope.
Yes.
So Brennan.
Councillor Brennan.
Nigel?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just seeking a bit of clarity. Page 142, 6.3, second bullet point, fourth line down. The total contract change are being shared. Is that supposed to be charges? Or if it's changed, then it should be is, not are. Can somebody clarify that for me, please?
I would suggest that the contract changes are being shared. So that is a typo on my respect. And
Sorry, I can't hear you. Well, I can hear you, but very vaguely. Sorry.
Okay.
Get closer to your microphone. Sorry.
Thank you. Yes, so it's the total contract charges are being shared. So I'll make sure that that's noted and updated for the report.
Okay,
That's
thank
a
you very
typo
much.
on my part, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nigel. Okie dokie. So I'll move forward to the recommendation then. Excuse me. So we have 1 and 2, Cabinet to note the and comment on findings of the final project report and recommend full council endorse Lawyers work towards the best-in-class housing offer. 2, Cabinet to recommend full council adoption of allocations scheme. So put that to the vote. All in favour?
Looks to be unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you. Swiftly moving on to agenda item number 18, Housing Strategy Enforcement Policy, page 315. Lee Booth was going to present. I've forgotten who is now going to present for her.
That's Kevin Philcox.
Kevin Philcox, you're absolutely right. Kevin, welcome and fire away, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be as brief as possible. And basically, the housing enforcement officers based in housing standards enforce housing standards as a matter of routine. The primary legislation is the Housing Act 2004. Since that came out, there have been a lot of supplementary legislation regarding issues such as smoke alarms and redress schemes with agencies. The civil penalties have come in, and rent repayment orders are a new legal requirement. Recently, there's been electrical safety regulations requiring that properties have electrical safety certificate once every 5 years, and that legislation requires that the council adopt a civil penalty procedure, which is supplement to any procedures it's had before. In addition, there's a banning order procedure that is not actually on our books at the moment, a policy procedure. So to make sure everything fits into place and to pull everything together regarding all the different acts and regulations over the last few years, we put together an enforcement policy, not only dealing with the civil penalty procedures, but also detailing our approach with landlords and tenants into a single document for the officers to have a single place to actually refer to if they're challenged. So I've been as brief as I can, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, any questions, councillors? No.
No questions.
Wonderful. I don't have any either. So I'll move to the recommendation, which is, excuse me, on page 318. 1, consider and approve council's new housing standards enforcement policy. 2, approve alternative action in respect to proposed new housing standards enforcement policy. All those in favour, please show.
So I assume that's for 1, Chairman, not 2.
Sorry, you are absolutely correct there. Yeah, 1. Yeah.
That looks to be unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Okie dokie. And of course, we've already dealt with item 19. So moving on to item 20, we're nearly there. Future of grant, community grants. Carrie Gallagher, page 360. Would you amplify, please, and report?
Sure. Thank you, Chairman. So I won't go through in huge amounts of depth. So I'm conscious of the time. Members will be familiar with the report, which talks about the future of community grants. There's a number of elements to this. Within the recommendations, I'll go through each point in turn with a little bit of detail. Within the report, we talk about changes to the member-led funding system, which is intended to help to utilise the underspend that we are seeing at the moment. So the proposal is for members to be ring-fenced their normal £500 to spend before the 31st of January. And if the money isn't spent at that point, effectively it will all go into one pot, which members can apply to on a first come first serve basis to use up any underspend prior to March the 1st, giving officers time to process that before the year end. This was discussed at Economic Success Panel. Members were in agreement that this will be an effective use of that funding that's around, where what we hope will be achieved by this is that in wards where money isn't needed as much as it is in others, it would allow for that money to kind of ebb and flow into those other areas, and for people to utilise it a little bit better than they are currently able to. What we would hope that we would be able to offer as well around the member-led funding is for community groups themselves to register their interest, I suppose is a good way to put it, or to make contact with their councillor using our website. So at the moment, it's a very not passive, I don't know if that's the right word, but councillors are required to go out and speak to everybody themselves. At the moment, people are stuck at home. There's not as much ability to be interactive with people. And we know as well that people like to do things at different times of the day. So what we would like to put onto the website is a form where groups could simply put their details down to advise councillors that they're interested in their funding and that they've got a project that they might like to talk to them about. So very simple details, name, group name, what you'd like to do with some funding and what the purpose of that group is. That would allow then that councillor to have a discussion with them and then make a decision as to whether or not their funding would go to them. That is not it's not an application form, it's not anything like that. It still very much sits with the member to make their decision about where they'd like their funding to be allocated, but it allows people to make greater amounts of contact. The third point around member-led funding is to introduce some branding and promotion abilities to it. At the moment, as I've mentioned, it relies solely on word of mouth and for members to go out and to promote it continuously. What we'd like to introduce is simply a logo. We've got a couple of the members on board today that have got their Community at Heart logo. So something around that which would evidence that there's a grant available to people. It would become a familiar thing that people would see. So when we do promotion, we could have that logo present, and it would become something that people would see and recognise as the money that Broadland Council is giving out to our communities. We hope that that would increase its prevalence and usage as well. So that's it in terms of the member-led funding. Just other points to draw attention to are our aspirations to, and I know SIL came up earlier, community infrastructure levy was discussed earlier, but to be more mindful of that and where we could support groups to access greater amounts of money. SIL is incredibly well used in Broadland, and we just want to do more work to ensure that where grants are available to the community, we mix and match where appropriate to support our community groups. The last two little bits to mention, I just wanted to draw attention to the launch of the Community at Heart Awards. We're doing that next Thursday, I do believe. The 5th of November is the launch of the Community at Heart Awards, where we'll be inviting good causes along to inform them that the lottery will start properly in 2021 with ticket sales going online in January and then on to our first draw in February. What we'd like to do with some of the funding that comes from that grant, as you'll be aware, of every £1 that's spent, 10 pence of that goes back into Broadland Council to spend on community projects. And what the proposal is in this report going to Cabinet is that that money is spent on a startup grant. So where you've got non-formalised groups and they've got an idea and they'd like to try something out, they're able to apply for up to £300 to have a try at that and to see whether or not it's something that's viable to continue on in the future and potentially receive more formalised member funding as we go on. They are the main points in the report, and I would welcome any questions.
Thank you, Kerry.
Councillor Prutton has wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, I've got Sue Prutton, I've got Caroline, and I've got Grant, and then I would like to also
Susan Holland as well.
Just one second. Sue Holland and me. Right, okie dokie. So Sue Pruton, would you like to
Paragraph 3.5.3. It's just a comment that I'm pleased to see the increased security of the members applying, putting in their own bank details. I felt so acutely embarrassed asking people who came to me for their personal account details. It was most embarrassing, and I think they had an element of trust in me. So I'm very pleased to see that increased level of security. End of comment.
Oh, please, thank you,
Sue. Caroline?
Hi, I was quite surprised to see that 5 members didn't spend any of their budget and 10 members spent only 75% of their budget. If they can't spend their budget, I can certainly spend it for them. Do they need extra training on how this works?
If members would like any extra training at all, we can always organise that. One of the things that we know and we see is that in some areas, councillors try incredibly hard to spend their money, but there are no groups that need it at the time, and that might be because there's nothing going on. But equally, it could be that they've accessed funding from other areas. We've been able to give them information that would mean that they don't need to spend that money. But your point is exactly right. You would be able to spend it. So this would allow for a small amount of movement within the budget to allow that money to go to other areas where it is needed. Where we hope as well that the ability for the community to contact the councillor directly, it means that where groups haven't been identified, and that's perhaps why money hasn't been spent, that it's a bit more of an open flow of conversation between community groups and the members themselves.
Kerry, I certainly could have spent double, and I would have welcomed the £1,000 per member as South Norfolk members have. Just want to make that point.
Okay, Sue Holland? Grant?
Sorry, thank you, Chairman. Right, I had a look at this document, and I'm a little concerned about the second. Sorry, it's the first bullet point, to utilise the underspend in February each year. 2 of those 5 members that didn't spend their budget were here in the Brundle ward. And the reason they didn't get to spend it was because the commitments that they made to actually spend, because I'm aware of the promises that they made for that spending, was that those were done in the early part of this year. So when it came to actually processing the applications for the grant funding, it was too late. So if you're going to have a cut-off of the end of January or even December, and then whatever money is left over in February, by the 1st of February, it could still be that the process of those applications being done in February and March, so that I would rather see a situation where that the cutoff is the end of March. If you haven't spent it, or if you haven't had it committed or allocated, that it then goes into the pot for the next year, and that pot is then distributed equally across all the wards. And in other words, every year, if there's a carryover, that pot will get bigger or remain at an equilibrium. So that was my concern about underspend being having a cutoff before the end of the year. I don't agree with the SIL money being used for community projects. That is a loan scheme. It's not a grant scheme. The other aspects I certainly agree with. The community groups actually inputting into the process. More formalized branding scheme, I totally agree with that. And if you're talking about a startup grant, that I believe that should be with the community at Heart Lottery. And when we talk about sort of advertising the scheme, I would like to see a more proactive approach through our communications team to residents. I do go to all the parish council meetings, and I do keep reminding them, but you only have a certain number of people attending parish council meetings that say anything about you know, when we talk about our community grant. It should be something like in the Broadland News, that we would advertise or promote this community grant. So those are just some of the thoughts that I had with regards to this scheme.
Thank you, Grant. Could I ask? I'm waiting to get in myself here, so I'm next after Sue Holland. Do you want to fire away, Sue?
Yeah, I think some of my points might be similar to Grant's, but if I start with something I think is a really good idea, I like the fact that there'll be a connection on the website for people, or a form on the website so people can connect with their councillor. I think that's an excellent plan. And I agree with Sue entirely about them entering their own bank details, much more satisfactory. Even branding, I'm quite in favour of. Where I'm a little bit concerned is I love the idea that where there is an underspend, that it can be rolled out to other wards where it might be better used. What I'm slightly concerned about is moving the deadline back to January, because it's difficult sometimes to get this paperwork together. And it's particularly when you take January, because I had this slight panic last year when I was working with a scout group, that we'd started working on what they wanted and what we were going to put forward. And then suddenly I was told, well, the deadline was in January and we've got Christmas in between. And it turned out to be wrong, in fact. But the panic there was, you know, it's hard to get hold of people over that period. And I think if it runs for a year, it should run for a year. You can't, it seems to me, you can't really allocate something as a member grant in that year and then say, but you've only got 9 months to sort it out. So in that respect, I agree with Grant that if you are going to roll it over, it would be useful to roll it over at the end of the year. My other point was going to be that the SIL, you know, giving people an advance on the SIL is not the same as a grant. So you can't, I don't think that's like for like. So that's a loan rather than, you know, against SIL money. So that to me is nothing to do with a grant. And my main point I think I want to come back to here is last year we asked about the possibility of reviewing this and increasing the amount that we put into the grant fund, because as has been said, South Norfolk have £1,000. I could have spent the money twice over, frankly. And so I do think that we should be considering whether we can increase that. That hasn't come up, even though it was asked for last year. And the other element to this is that in the past, there has been another fund, I believe, that people did get grants from, which was not member-led, but that was done away with, I think, by Broadland. And I think they still do it in South Norfolk. And what they do with their surplus is it rolls into that fund. So we did ask about the second fund as well, whether that could be investigated, whether we could reinstate that. So my basic points are, one, I don't think the January deadline for a cut-off is very helpful. And two, I'm slightly concerned about where you're rolling this over to, and that I would like to consider increasing it and having the other fund as well. Thank you.
Would you like me to come back on some of those points, Chairman?
I'm just thinking whether to come in now and then. No, You can, yeah, and then I'll get my turn then. Thank you.
I think hopefully I'll cover everything. With regard to the carryover, the proposal for the 31st of March is just 1 month earlier than it currently is. A decision was made at the beginning of this that there wouldn't be a carryover of spend, so this would be something that would need to be considered by Cabinet. But at present, that is the 1st of March is the cut-off date. So this moves it forward just 1 or 4 weeks really, because February is the shorter month, to allow for that money to be looked at. So it's not the case that you're losing kind of 3 months. It's just the 1 month that you have left. And obviously this wouldn't come in straight away either. This will be for the next financial year. So things remain as they are until end of March 2021. This would then come in from the 1st of April. So you wouldn't be looking at that slightly shorter deadline for another year yet. So there is hopefully enough time for you to kind of adapt and change to that if this were to be agreed. I'm pleased that you're all happy with the idea of communities contacting us. I think that's going to add a really positive element to it. I also appreciate what you're saying about SIL. This isn't about changing SIL or anything like that. This is just about being mindful of what's available to people and helping them to access the loan scheme and whatever else is appropriate as and when. I think that as officers, we could be more efficient in making sure that people are aware of what's available. And I'm going to be speaking to our colleagues that deal with SIL in order to make sure that happens. This isn't just about people who receive member funding or any other small pots of funding accessing SIL, but equally the other way around. Customers that we've got coming to us that are asking for support through the SIL scheme may also be eligible for and require support from member-led funding, for example, or other projects. So just trying to tie those two pieces up. And with regard to the amount of money, this is a member decision. This isn't something that officers are able to make a decision about as to whether or not the pot is larger or smaller, and equally whether or not in Broadland you might like to implement something like they've got in South Norfolk around a community action fund. So we've done everything that we've been given the ability to do at this point.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, in sort of summarising around these points, just be on a point that Sue and Grant made as well around the cut-off date. I understand what you're saying. You're bringing it forward a month early, and then of course what you're looking to do is to make sure that there will be need, and it will vary from year to year. Sometimes need be great in other wards and it won't in others. So that could actually be quite helpful. As Caroline said, I could have spent mine 10 times over, actually, probably more. If a member, for instance, hasn't been able to get all their paperwork through, and just for continue what I want to say, you can give me an answer on this, it might help the committee. If a member hasn't been able, they haven't been able to get it through just in time on that cut-off date, it then comes back out to members. That member, of course, isn't then excluded from putting the application in for the fund anyway.
Not at all. Not at
exactly
all.
Right. Thank you. So I don't actually see. I don't think it would be an inhibitor because you've still got up to date effectively. And who knows, a member might then pop through and go, do you know what? I couldn't get it through, so now I'm asking for it now. So it wouldn't restrict that at all. Back on the premise here, the most interesting page to me is the page where this all really came from, and that's page 365. And it's section 3.59 at the top of the page, leading into 5.10. Sue's quite right, Sue Holland. Last year, if you recall, I called this matter into the committee. I'd done some research on South Norfolk because the original premise that we'd been told at a SEAT meeting previous year that I was also on, and before it went to ONS, was that South Norfolk was reducing their members scheme down from 1,000 to 500. The discussion was to introduce it into our authority, that we'd just be running now a member-led scheme in place of the other schemes that used to exist, and that's all that exists now, and that would be based on 500 because South Norfolk are going to recommend theirs reduced to 500. And there was no mention to us at that time that there was a community action scheme in place as well. So I called it in on that basis, and as you know, Sean attended it, which was very good of him. But there is, as a result of that, and also the minutes of the cabinet meeting and the review that took place in South Norfolk, so the scrutiny committee and the cabinet agreed to retain it at £1,000 and maintain their £50,000 community action scheme. If there is a rollover takes place, it goes into community action scheme. Also, the evidential paperwork on that clearly demonstrates, and I believe it's the case still, that the 50,000 community action grant scheme is always oversubscribed, and therefore there's a great need for it. Sometimes people, of course, put in wrong applications, but on correct applications, there was not enough money to cover it. So clearly there is a demand out there. Are we that different from South Norfolk in terms of demand and need around this? So we had recommended really clearly, and I believe it was unanimous at the time, that this should be reviewed over the next year, that our recommendation is that it goes to £1,000, and also that we look at establishing a community action grant scheme for larger projects for communities in line with the figures of South Norfolk, £50,000. As it stands at the moment, they have, I think it's 100,000 just under for supporting their communities and wellbeing support, etc. And we are just at £23,500 spread across the whole of Broadland. And I think on that basis, I'd like to reiterate, and I'll ask the committee to support this, reiterate our original recommendation a year ago that we are recommending to Cabinet, and we amend the recommendations here to increase the amount to £1,000 and also to put in place a community grant scheme as well. I'm also noting in 3.5, the wellbeing panel itself. These comments were also reflected in the recent wellbeing panel. The wellbeing panel has also reflected this issue about the £1,000 and the need for it. So the wellbeing panel is also supporting that point of view as well. So I'd like to recommend that as well as an amendment to go forward here on the £1,000 as we did last year, and also for the establishment of the community action grant scheme run the same basis as South Norfolk. And I'd look for a seconder on that as well.
I'll second that.
I'll second.
I'm not sure who seconded that. I couldn't see the screens, but
I said I'll second.
Okay. So on that basis, taking also Grant and Sue the clarification that the officer's given that the member would still be able to put in an application anyway. Would you be okay with that as it is, the recommendation?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I tried to second it, but Caroline got in before me.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that has answered the question, hasn't it? Thank you.
Thank you. Okie dokie. So on the recommendation here, we've got
Nigel Brennan waving furiously, Jim.
Nigel, yes.
Thank you, Tony. Yeah, all the blood's run out of my hand while I was waiting.
I couldn't see
sorry.
Nigel.
Yeah, all right. That's all right, Steve. Okay. Yeah, just I'll keep it very, very brief. Just going back to this business of underspend. As some or all of you will know, we're a two-person ward or two-member ward in Blowfield and South Walsham. I had a slight underspend. I managed to spend most of it, and then said, well, what little bit is left over, could that just be added to Councillor Justine Thomas's little budget, because she'd already got 2 applications which had been approved, and I was told, no, because you're too late. And that was the day after it actually ran out. Okay, rules are rules, but if the application had already been processed, surely just that something like another £75. Surely that could have been just allocated in the same ward. Anyway, because I'm not happy about this, that if I don't spend it myself, it then goes out to everybody. If we're a two-member ward, I would prefer, in my humble opinion, that if I can't spend it in my ward, but my co-member can, then she should have that opportunity first, not just throw it open to everybody. But if she can't spend it, then sure, fine, then let it go to somebody else.
I think there's a way around this, Nigel, and that is for the ward members to work together. I know myself, Sue and David over in Aylsham, that's what we would do. So if one spent and was in the same situation, I'm going to communicate with
Well, yeah, that is what we tried to do. But this cut-off date was absolutely rigidly enforced, and it was just the day after when we thought, right, we can't do anything else with it, and it was literally one day after, and I was told, no, you're too late. But anyway,
with the
rules are rules. I accept that.
Yeah, with the cut-off date being brought forward by 4 weeks, you'd now have a second bite of the cherry.
Oh yeah, I can see benefits of doing that, but it was just that lack of flexibility. I feel at that time.
This seems a bit more flexible now. So
this does seem more flexible. Yeah, yeah, but it is still that point that if I get to that, as you say, work with your fellow member. But if we get to that point, then we can't then just say, okay, give it to the other half of the members that are dealing with it.
Does the officer just want to cover the point for Nigel?
It's just been taken away from us, nonetheless, and then ends up somewhere else. I don't deny anybody else having it, but I think we've got 2-member or 3-member ward. It should be shared out between them first.
I don't know. Does the officer want to cover this point for Nigel?
I don't want to labour the point too much.
Obviously, I can't comment on your individual circumstances last year, Councillor Brennan, but certainly this would enable your counterpart in your individual wards to apply for that extra funding. As you can imagine, the team are working within guidance that they need to operate within in order to finish the year end and to get things sorted. So, you know, deadlines are there for that reason, but hopefully this allows for a little bit more flexibility. So where you have got some underspend, it is able to be used by another member that's able to take it. With regard to these grants, you guys have authorised, you've got delegated authority in order to spend in your own districts, and that's where it makes it a little bit more tricky to just move money over without this this new process being in place. But hopefully this will help you in the future, so you wouldn't have that problem again.
Okie dokie. Grant, it's now 20 to 2. I've got a recommendation which I'm going to put. Is it concerning that? Is it urgent? Because it is 20 to 2.
It's just that I wanted to clarify about this this priority, this carryover of the funds. If somebody's in the process of doing an application and the cut-off date comes, is it not possible to have something like a priority that those members who are in the process but haven't arrived at that deadline, that they get a first bite of that pot that's carried over into February before anybody else comes in? Because then suddenly, if they had a project for £500 and there's only, say, 1,500 and 8 other members have jump in first, surely there should be priority given to that one who has, I don't know, maybe you can have something like an expression of interest that you are working on something, that you get priority before other members have helping themselves to that pot. So that was my only concern about that.
I'm not aware of sort of a deluge of people coming to apply at that deadline. It's definitely not the case for us that as a team we see such an influx of cases on the last day or two. The deadline itself, this is one of the first times I've heard, I suppose, that there's been such a concern about the deadline and such a rush to get it in. I think that if that's the case, that you're so close to the wire, then we'd need to deal with that on a case-by-case basis, because it's certainly not a problem that I'm aware of, and I'm very open to be corrected. I'm not aware of the fact that this is a problem for absolutely everybody, that they're getting so close to the wire without being able to spend their money.
Yeah, this is the case that I referred to earlier of the 2 members who were trying to spend their money but just couldn't get it past the wire.
And we can work with the community group, earlier rather than later, to ensure that they know that the date's coming. All grant pots have a deadline, and we just need to support community groups and yourselves to meet those deadlines, really.
Okie dokie. All right, so moving forward then to the recommendations. So we've got the bullet points on page 366. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm guessing, James, that the amendment would go in. Well, yeah. First of all, I'll put the amendment. And I'll come back to where it should.
Where we put it in, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, what the proposal is that we reiterate out the the policy we took last year that we should indeed have this increase to 1,000 per member and introduce a community action fund, the total of 50,000, and that we're recommending that to Cabinet. All those in favour, please.
Can I vote against, please?
Are you, Councillor Bullman, are you
I'm voting against.
Abstaining? You're voting
I'm
against.
voting against.
So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 in favour and 1 against.
Thank you.
That's carried.
Okay, so we'll move on to where, I'm guessing, James, if you look at this, the first bullet point is changes to the member-led ward grant scheme to utilise underspend in February. I think really it probably needs to come before that, doesn't it?
I think it probably does.
Yeah.
I'll put that as the first bullet point.
Yeah, brilliant, okie dokie. And again, minute to support that, James, would be great. And thank you, the officers that supported, reported to this. I'll move on because we really are running on now.
Chairman, you agree all the bullet points as well? All the committee were in favour of those, I take it?
Sorry, I've taken it, we did, but
yeah.
Yeah, we have all.
Is there any?
Yeah, I'm just reconfirming we've agreed to all the bullet points as well. Agreed?
Yeah, as I understood it, that was included in the vote,
Yeah.
yes, Chairman.
I thought I did.
Steve,
but
can I ask a question?
Question myself now.
Steve, can I ask a question on your amendment? You didn't mention about the increase in £1,000 per member.
I did.
Did you?
That's the first line, yeah.
That was. I've got
Okay,
that.
sorry, I missed that. Okay, thanks, James.
Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, it might be the mic or something, Caroline. Right, so I think we can move on now to item 21, temporary change to housing allocation update policy.
Chairman, can I interject and say I have to leave the meeting now?
Okay, thanks, Peter.
Sorry.
Temporary change to housing allocation policy update, page 367. Richard Dunshaw, if you would like to amplify, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. This hopefully will be a nice quick one, so I'll summarise nice and quickly, and then I'll field any questions afterwards. So in June 2020, in the midst of a pandemic, Cabinet agreed for a temporary amendment to the housing policy, placing those present in supported accommodation ready for move on to independent accommodation in high, whereby their moving would open up a vacancy for someone currently in our temporary accommodation. This change was initially for 3 months, with a request to come back to Cabinet to report its effectiveness and consider a further extension. Really brief background, just to remind everybody. At the start of a pandemic, central government requested that we accommodated everyone through Everybody In. That was the term central government provided to reduce the risk of the spread of COVID-19. This increased not overnight, as you'll see from the graph, but very, very rapidly. This increased our TA from our normal occupancy of around 15 up to 33. So we had to take proactive action to try and assist those people into suitable accommodation as quickly as possible, and this change was to try and ensure that would happen. A great number of those people who did present to us were from what we would call transient accommodations, so they were sofa surfers, and obviously due to COVID-19 and the restriction with lockdown, sofa surfing was no longer an option for them. However, this was a great opportunity to be able to assist people who do come in and out of our service very, very regularly, and basically we had a captive audience at that point to be able to assist them at that point. So the findings from taking this actions are at the height of our TA occupancy, temporary accommodation occupancy, it was costing the council around £9,000 per a week to accommodate these people. We've now managed to get it down to around £5,000 per week, which is a significant savings. Of the 22 occupants we currently have within our temporary accommodation, 5 people have already been nominated to another property, 8 remain in bed and breakfast, and 9 remain in our own stock. So bed and breakfast is not our accommodation of choice. We have seen bed and breakfast providers also increase the amount of money in which they charge, because they also have a captive audience. Every council is facing these similar situations. Therefore, we have a bigger demand on temporary accommodation market as a whole. Bed and breakfast, however, is perfect for people who are high risk, where they need someone on site 24 hours a day, and that this temporary change is there to assist people get through that B&B as quickly as possible into supported accommodation, or what we would term as housing first. So the extension will give so basically, yes, it has been effective, and yes, it has worked. However, we still have 8 people in bed and breakfast that we still need to move through the system. And we also need to plan for the fact that we are going to see more people pull on temporary accommodation in the upcoming months, as the impact as of the removal of the embargo on evictions start to come into play, as we start to see evictions start to happen. So my recommendation within this report is that this has been a very effective change to put into place, and we would like a further extension for 3 months in anticipation that this would stop in January, and these people would go back within the normal housing allocations policy moving forwards.
Thank you, Richard. I'm actually going to summarise, and I'm going to put something to you, committee, because on this one we had a full debate on this before. It's an exact repeat of what we agreed before and Cabinet agreed before. It's simply, put in simple terms, an extension for another 3 months, what it previously agreed before. That's correct, Richard, isn't it?
Agreed.
Yeah. So it's just, all we've been asked for is to extend it for a further 3 months on what we've previously debated and discussed, and the Cabinet as well. And on that basis, I'm strongly suggesting we simply move to the vote on this one on the recommendation. Can we agree that? Yes, yes. Thank you. So I move that we do indeed put that recommendation to the Cabinet, which is on page 371. All in favour?
It looks to be unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. I'll move
Thank you very much.
item 8, exclusion